My name is Nia. I am 35 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful software developer, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. Last Sunday, they invited me to an upscale brunch to catch up. Between mimosas and avocado toast, my mother leaned forward smirking. You know, Charmaine, you are lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way. I simply sipped my coffee and smiled. That night, I logged in, disabled every family credit account, and emailed my lawyer about selling the cabin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut meant privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our four-bedroom house, with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool, was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom, painted pale blue, at my mother Elaine's insistence, despite my preference for green, became my sanctuary and prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight A's, joined honor societies, and pushed myself to the absolute brink just to get a nod of approval. But nothing prepared me for the ultimate betrayal that awaited me in my own marriage. That night started like any ordinary family dinner until one bite changed everything. Minutes after eating the meal my husband lovingly prepared, I collapsed and was rushed to the ER at 9 p.m. But what doctors discovered, and the secret my husband tried to hide, turned our marriage into a nightmare no one saw coming. I sat at my own dining table, the one I bought with my first major software contract bonus, taking a bite of the mushroom risotto DeAndre had spent the entire afternoon cooking. The culinary school dropout loved playing chef in my expensive kitchen. He claimed this dinner was to celebrate our 4-year anniversary a few days early. The first bite tasted earthy and rich, but within seconds a violent burning sensation clawed its way up my throat. I gasped, my hands flying to my neck as the dining room began to spin. The exquisite taste turned to absolute ash on my tongue. My airway was slamming shut. I fell forward, my chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor as I hit the ground. I looked up at DeAndre, expecting him to drop his fork, to scream, to rush to my side, and pull out his phone to call for an ambulance. Instead, he simply leaned back in his chair. He picked up his crystal glass of bourbon, took a painfully slow sip, and watched me struggle like I was a program on television. "What are you doing?" "Call an ambulance." I tried to scream, but the words never formed. It came out as a pathetic, wheezing rasp. My chest heaved desperately, fighting for a tiny sliver of air. DeAndre did not flinch. He looked down at me with cold, empty eyes and calmly told me to stop being dramatic. He said it is just heartburn, and I should drink some water and get up off the floor. My vision blurred at the edges, dark spots dancing across my eyes. This was not heartburn. I have a severe, well-documented allergy to black truffles. DeAndre knew this. He had known this since our very first date, when I had to thoroughly interrogate a waiter at an Italian restaurant. I tried to crawl toward the entryway where my designer purse sat on the console table. My EpiPen was in there. It is always in there. Every inch felt like a grueling marathon. My nails scratched against the floorboards. My lungs screamed and burned. Just as my trembling fingers brushed the leather strap of my bag, the front door swung open. It was Keisha, the younger sister of DeAndre. She walked in wearing a designer dress I had bought her for her birthday, carrying 3 shopping bags paid for with the supplementary credit card I foolishly gave her for emergencies. She stopped in her tracks, looked down at me writhing on the floor, and loudly sucked her teeth. "Lord, is she doing this again? Always ruining the vibe," Keisha complained loudly, stepping right over my thrashing legs to get to the kitchen. "I swear, DeAndre, your wife is so exhausting, always making everything about her." She opened the refrigerator, the bright light spilling across the kitchen floor, and popped open a can of sparkling water. Neither of them cared that I was turning blue. Neither of them made a move to help. In fact, they seemed completely relaxed. They were waiting for it. With the absolute last ounce of my fading strength, I blindly tapped the emergency SOS button on my Apple Watch. The faint metallic voice of an emergency dispatcher echoed from my wrist just as the darkness finally pulled me under. I woke up hours later to the harsh, blinding, sterile lights of the emergency room. The clock on the pale wall read 11:30 at night. A thick plastic oxygen tube was secured under my nose, and medical monitors beeped steadily, anchoring me to the reality that I was still alive. A doctor stood at the foot of my hospital bed holding a thick clipboard. Right next to him was DeAndre putting on an absolute masterclass in acting. He was crying hysterically, his hands covering his face, playing the role of the devoted, terrified husband whose world was falling apart. "I just do not understand," DeAndre sobbed to the doctor, his shoulders shaking. "I bought cheap mushrooms from the farmer's market down the street. I swear to God I did not know. I would never ever hurt my wife because she is my everything." The doctor sighed heavily, looking down at the papers on his clipboard. He said the toxicology screen confirmed a massive anaphylactic shock triggered by a highly concentrated amount of black truffles. It was nearly fatal. He told DeAndre that if the paramedics had arrived 2 minutes later, his wife would not be here right now. She was completely unresponsive when they loaded her into the ambulance. I lay there too weak to speak, my throat, feeling like it had been scrubbed with raw sandpaper, but my mind was racing with terrifying clarity. Cheap mushrooms, I thought to myself. We live in an upscale neighborhood in Atlanta. DeAndre is a trained culinary chef who is constantly begging me to fund his high-end restaurant concept. He knows the difference between a standard button mushroom and a luxury black truffle. You do not just accidentally buy a $400 imported truffle and casually chop it into a weeknight dinner. DeAndre walked over to my bedside and leaned down. He kissed my forehead, wiping away his fake tears with the back of his hand. "I am so glad you are okay, baby," he whispered softly, though his eyes remained completely devoid of warmth. "I need to go step out into the hallway and call my mother because she has been worried sick about you. I will be right back." The moment the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind him, my survival instincts kicked in. I forced myself to sit up, ignoring the dizziness washing over me. My eyes darted around the small room and landed on the clear plastic hospital belongings bag resting on the chair next to my bed. My purse was bundled inside it. I reached out, pulling the bag toward me with violently trembling hands. I ripped the plastic open and unzipped my purse. I dug frantically past my wallet, my keys, and my makeup bag until I felt the familiar hard plastic casing of my EpiPen. I pulled it out into the harsh hospital light. I wanted to see if maybe it had expired, wondering why I had not been able to save myself if I had managed to grab my bag right before passing out. I stared at the device in my hands, and the remaining color completely drained from my face. My blood ran ice cold. The blue safety cap was off, the needle was fully exposed, and the chamber was completely empty. Someone had intentionally discharged my life-saving medication before the dinner even started. My husband did not make a mistake. He made a plan. And Keisha stepping over my dying body was not just ignorance, it was complicity. I was entirely alone, trapped in a marriage that had just become a crime scene, and my would-be murderer was pacing right outside my hospital room door, waiting to finish the job. I carefully slipped the empty device back into my purse and zipped it shut. I had to play along. I had to pretend I believed his lies until I could figure out how to destroy him completely. Morning arrived with the harsh fluorescent glow of the hospital room fully illuminating my reality. The rhythmic hissing of the oxygen machine beside my bed was the only sound keeping me grounded. My throat still felt like it was lined with shattered glass, and every breath required conscious effort. I lay there staring at the ceiling, mentally replaying the image of that empty EpiPen in my purse. I needed a plan. I needed time. But DeAndre was not going to give me either. At exactly 8 in the morning, the heavy wooden door to my room swung open. I expected a nurse coming to check my vitals, or perhaps the doctor with my discharge papers. Instead, DeAndre walked in, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, looking completely refreshed. He did not come alone. Trailing right behind him was his mother Shirley, carrying her signature oversized designer handbag and a deeply condescending expression. Behind them stood a short, balding man in a cheap gray suit clutching a thick leather briefcase. There were no flowers. There were no balloons. There was no desperate relief in my husband's eyes at seeing me awake and breathing. This was a business meeting and I was the target. DeAndre walked over to the side of my bed and gently placed a warm hand over mine. The contact made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to remain perfectly still. "Good morning, beautiful," he whispered, kissing my forehead. "I brought my mother to check on you and Mr. Davis. Here is a notary public. We have some important things to take care of, so you can just focus on resting." Shirley stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. She looked me up and down, taking in my pale skin and the oxygen tubes. "Lord have mercy. Naya, you look absolutely terrible," she sighed, shaking her head. "This is exactly what I have been warning you about. You push yourself way too hard. Running that massive tech company, dealing with all those developers and contracts, it is too much stress for a wife. You are going to work yourself into an early grave." I blinked slowly, keeping my voice a raspy whisper. "I had an allergic reaction, Shirley. I did not have a stress-induced heart attack." She waved her hand dismissively, her heavy gold bracelets clinking together. "It is all connected. Baby," she insisted, pulling a chair right up to my bed. "You modern black women always want to carry the weight of the entire world on your shoulders. You want to be the boss at work and the boss at home. But look where it got you. Lying in a hospital bed, almost dead. It is time for you to step back and let your husband be the man of the house. Let him lead the way God intended." DeAndre nodded solemnly, playing the role of the reluctant but dutiful protector. He reached into Mr. Davis' briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of stapled documents. He placed them on my tray table right next to my untouched breakfast. "I just want you to heal, Nia," DeAndre said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "The doctor said you need absolute peace and quiet. No emails, no phone calls, no business decisions. So I had my lawyer draft up a medical power of attorney and a temporary transfer of controlling rights for your company, just until you are back on your feet. Mr. Davis is here to notarize your signature, and then I will handle everything. You will not have to worry about a single payroll or vendor contract." I stared down at the documents. The bold black letters at the top of the page seemed to mock me. General power of attorney and full business transfer. It was not temporary. The wording was absolute. He wanted full legal authority to drain my business accounts, to make executive decisions, and to effectively steal the software empire I had built from the ground up before I even met him. This was his grand plan. Kill me with the truffle, or if I survived medically, incapacitate me long enough to rob me blind. My mind raced, but my face remained an unreadable mask. I slowly pushed the tray table a few inches away from my chest. "Thank you for worrying about me, DeAndre," I said, making sure my voice sounded appropriately weak. "But Marcus, my vice president of operations, already has full contingency protocols in place. I texted him from the ambulance before I passed out. The company is completely fine. I do not need to sign anything." The mask of the loving husband slipped for a fraction of a second. DeAndre's jaw clenched tightly. "Nia, do not be stubborn right now," he said, his tone dropping an octave. "Marcus is just an employee. I am your husband. I should be the one legally protecting our assets." Before I could respond, the hospital room door slammed open again. It was Keisha. She marched in holding a giant iced coffee, looking visibly annoyed that she had to be awake this early. She took one look at the unsigned papers on the tray table and rolled her eyes dramatically. "Are you seriously fighting him on this?" Keisha snapped, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You are unbelievable, Nia. You are literally hooked up to oxygen, and you are still trying to control every single thing. My brother has been up all night worrying about you and stepping up to the plate, and you are disrespecting his authority." "Keisha, please," DeAndre warned, raising a hand, but he did not actually stop her. "No. DeAndre, she needs to hear this." Keisha continued, raising her voice so loud that a passing nurse glanced into the room. "You are such a selfish wife, Nia. You always have to be the smartest person in the room. You always have to hold your money over our heads. DeAndre is trying to save your business while you are lying around playing the victim. Just sign the damn papers and stop acting like you are better than us." Shirley nodded in agreement, crossing her arms over her chest. "She is right, Nia. A real wife trusts her husband. If you truly loved my son, you would not hesitate to put your life in his hands." The sheer audacity of her statement almost made me laugh. I had put my life in his hands last night, and he used that opportunity to watch me suffocate on his dining room floor. The anger burning inside me was hotter than the allergic reaction, but I knew I could not explode. If I screamed, if I accused him without ironclad proof, they would just call me hysterical. They would tell the doctors I was suffering from paranoia due to the lack of oxygen. I had to play this perfectly. I looked at the notary, Mr. Davis, who was shifting uncomfortably on his feet, clearly unaware that he was participating in an attempted corporate hijacking. "I am sorry, Mr. Davis," I said politely, "but my vision is incredibly blurry right now from the medication. I cannot read these documents clearly, and my personal lawyer would have my head if I signed a legal contract blindly. We will have to do this another time." Mr. Davis nodded quickly, eager to escape the tense family dynamic. "Of course, ma'am, I completely understand. I can always come back when you are feeling better." DeAndre shot the notary a lethal glare but quickly smoothed his features into a tight, tense smile. "Thank you, Mr. Davis," DeAndre said tightly. "Please wait for me out by the nurse's station. Mom, Keisha, go get some coffee in the cafeteria. I need a moment alone with my wife," Shirley huffed, grabbing her designer bag. "Fine, but you better talk some sense into her, DeAndre." She turned to me. "Prey on your pride, Nia. It is an ugly trait." Keisha rolled her eyes again and followed her mother out the door, letting it shut heavily behind them. The moment the latch clicked, DeAndre's entire demeanor changed. The fake concern vanished completely. The charming husband I had married was completely gone, replaced by a desperate cornered animal. He walked over to the door and locked it. Then he moved back to my bed, leaning down so close to my face that I could smell the stale coffee and mint on his breath. He grabbed my forearm, his fingers digging painfully into my skin, right above my IV line. "Stop playing games with me, Nia," he whispered, his voice a vicious, venomous hiss. "You are going to call that notary back in here, and you are going to sign every single page of that document." I stared right back into his cold eyes, refusing to let him see my fear. "Let go of my arm, DeAndre," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I am not signing anything. My company is mine." He leaned in even closer, his nose almost touching mine. "You do not understand," he sneered, his grip tightening. "You do not have a choice anymore." I frowned, genuinely confused for a split second. "What are you talking about?" DeAndre smiled, a dark, twisted expression that sent a genuine chill straight down my spine. "You think you are so smart," he whispered. "You think you control all the purse strings. But I already secured the $2.5 million commercial loan to expand my restaurant. The bank approved it yesterday morning." My heart hammered violently against my ribs. I never approved a loan. I never co-signed anything. My personal credit and my business assets were completely locked down. He saw the realization dawning in my eyes, and his smile grew wider. "That is right, baby," he taunted. "I used your business as the primary collateral. I forged your signature on the preliminary application and the collateral deed. The underwriters accepted it. The money is sitting in escrow right now. The only thing the bank needs to release the funds into my account is a notarized confirmation of my executive control." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You committed wire fraud," I whispered, staring at the monster I had shared a bed with for 4 years. "You forged my signature on federal bank documents." He chuckled softly, letting go of my arm and smoothing out the blanket over my chest. "I did what I had to do for my family," he replied casually. "And if you do not sign this power of attorney today, confirming that I have the right to manage your assets, the bank is going to freeze the application and trigger a fraud investigation." And who do you think they are going to believe? The successful, stressed-out wife who had a tragic medical emergency and forgot she signed the papers, or the struggling husband? He picked up the pen and pressed it forcefully into my palm. "If you do not sign this, Nia, my restaurant goes under tomorrow. My investors will sue me, and I promise you I will drag your pristine tech company right down into the mud with me. I will claim you were the mastermind behind the whole loan." I looked down at the heavy gold pen in my hand and then back up at the terrifying stranger standing over my hospital bed. He had trapped me. If I refused, he would destroy my reputation and drag my business into a federal fraud investigation. If I signed, I was handing him the keys to everything I had ever built. I was completely boxed in, and he knew it. I was completely boxed in, and he knew it. Or at least he thought he knew it. I stared at the heavy gold pen he had shoved into my palm. I needed him out of this hospital room right this very second. I could not fight him physically, and I could not outscream him. So I used the only weapon I had available in that moment. My own fragile state. I let my breathing suddenly hitch. I squeezed my eyes shut and began to hyperventilate, forcing my chest to heave aggressively. I clawed at my own throat, acting as though my airway was slamming shut all over again. The heart monitor clipped to my index finger immediately registered the spike in my pulse and began to beep with a frantic, shrill warning. The piercing alarm echoed through the small, sterile room. DeAndre took a quick step back, his eyes widening in genuine panic. Not because he cared about my health, but because a dead wife could not sign his fraudulent bank documents. I clutched my chest violently, gasping loudly for air that I did not actually need, knocking the plastic water pitcher off the tray table. It shattered against the linoleum floor, water spilling everywhere. The hospital room door burst open instantly. Two nurses rushed in, pushing past DeAndre without a second glance. "Sir, you need to step outside right now. Her heart rate is dangerously high," one nurse demanded, expertly checking my oxygen lines. DeAndre tried to argue, holding up his ridiculous legal paperwork like a shield. "I just need her to sign this one thing," he pleaded, raising his voice over the blaring alarms. "She is fine. It is just a panic attack." The taller nurse turned around and shoved him squarely in the chest, forcing him out into the hallway. "She is in medical distress, and you are entirely in the way," the nurse snapped, pulling the heavy door shut in his face and locking it from the inside. "Take deep breaths, honey. You are completely safe now," the other nurse coaxed, gently rubbing my shoulder. I slowly let my breathing return to normal, offering them a weak, apologetic nod. I blamed the overwhelming anxiety of nearly dying the night before. They bought the performance completely. They administered a mild sedative to calm my nerves, but I faked swallowing it, tucking the tiny white pill deep into my cheek. The moment they turned their backs to adjust my chart, I spit the pill into a tissue and hid it under my pillow. I was finally alone. The nurses left, promising to keep my husband out until my vitals remained stable for at least an hour. I threw off the thin hospital blanket and reached frantically into my belongings bag. Alongside my empty EpiPen was my iPad Pro. DeAndre was a man who deeply appreciated the aesthetic of luxury, but he completely lacked the intellect to understand how modern technology actually worked. When I bought him his latest flagship smartphone for his birthday, I set it up myself using our shared family Apple ID. He never bothered to separate his cloud storage. He arrogantly believed that deleting a text message on his personal phone meant it vanished into thin air forever. He had absolutely no idea that those exact same deleted messages automatically synced and backed up directly to my tablet. I unlocked the screen and opened the messaging app. A massive flood of blue and gray bubbles populated the screen. I bypassed his mundane group chats with his friends and clicked on a recently deleted folder. There were dozens of recovered threads. I clicked on an unsaved number first. The messages I read sent a wave of absolute nausea through my stomach that had absolutely nothing to do with my allergic reaction. The sender was someone named Silas. "You are completely out of time," DeAndre, the message read. 2.5 million is due by Friday at noon. We do not care if you have to sell a kidney or if your wife has to liquidate her little software company and her beauty salons. If the money is not in escrow, we are taking the restaurant, and then we are coming for you." DeAndre had replied in a panic. "I told you it is handled, Silas. My wife is signing over the business assets today. The collateral is locked in with the bank. Just give me 48 hours and the funds will clear." I stared at the screen, my blood running ice cold. He was drowning in illicit debt. His high-end restaurant was a total failure, and he had borrowed millions from dangerous private lenders to keep up his facade of being a successful entrepreneur. I backed out of the conversation with Silas and clicked on a heavily active text thread with a woman saved in his contacts as vendor supply. But the messages exchanged were not about wholesale napkins or kitchen produce. They were accompanied by high-resolution ultrasound photos. "He is kicking so much today," the woman wrote, followed by a heart emoji. "I cannot wait for you to finally leave her. When are we getting our new house, baby?" DeAndre had replied late last night, right before he served me dinner. "Soon, beautiful. I am taking care of the main obstacle tonight. The insurance payout will clear all my debts and buy us that mansion in Buckhead. I just picked up the imported black truffle from the specialty market. $400 but worth every single penny. She trusts my cooking completely. Cooking. She will not even taste it hidden in the risotto." I dropped the iPad onto my lap, my hands shaking so violently I could barely breathe. It was premeditated murder. The massive restaurant debt, the fake vendor, who was actually his pregnant mistress, the forged federal bank loans. My husband tried to murder me in our own dining room for a life insurance payout to fund a brand new life with another woman, and to cover up his pathetic financial failures. I did not cry. The betrayal was too deep, too absolute for tears. Instead, a cold, calculated rage settled over my entire body. I immediately opened my secure encrypted messaging app and texted my best friend Tasha. She was a brilliant, ruthless corporate attorney I had met during our undergraduate years at Spelman College. We were sisters in every way that mattered. "Emergency," I typed furiously. "I need you to run a full covert asset check on DeAndre right now. He forged my signature on a commercial loan for $2.5 million. Tasha replied almost instantly. "What the hell, Nia? Are you okay? I thought you were in the hospital for an allergy attack." "It was not an attack," I texted back. "He poisoned me. He intentionally fed me black truffles. I just found his deleted text messages synced on my iPad. He has a pregnant mistress, and he owes loan sharks millions for that stupid failing restaurant." Tasha, text bubbles appeared and disappeared rapidly as she processed the sheer horror of my words. "I am going to kill him with my bare hands," she typed. "Nia, you paid his entire way through culinary school. You literally sold your first car to pay for his tuition at Le Cordon Bleu. You lived on ramen noodles in a tiny studio apartment coding your first software program on a mattress on the floor just so he could pretend to be some elite chef. He has never worked a single day for anything he has." "I know," I replied, my thumbs flying across the glass screen, "and now he is trying to steal every single thing I built to pay off his mess. He cornered me with a shady notary this morning. He wants me to sign a medical power of attorney and full business transfer rights so he can access the bank funds." "Do not sign a single piece of paper," Tasha warned, her legal brain taking over completely. "I am logging into your business accounts right now to freeze any unauthorized transfers. I am setting up an emergency, blind, irrevocable trust. We are going to move every single asset you own, your tech company, your salons, your properties, out of the marital estate before he even realizes what hit him. He thinks he can outsmart a black woman who built an empire from absolutely nothing. He picked the wrong wife." I felt a massive surge of adrenaline cutting straight through my lingering physical weakness. I was not just a victim lying helpless in a hospital bed anymore. I was a survivor, and I was about to become his absolute worst nightmare. "How long will the trust take to set up and finalize?" I asked. "Give me 24 hours, Tasha replied. "Just keep playing the weak, dutiful, traumatized wife. Let him think he has the upper hand. Apologize to his awful mother, smile at his bratty sister Keisha, do whatever it takes to stall them until I get the paperwork filed with the state." Before I could type out a response to confirm our strategy, another message from Tasha popped up on the screen. The text was written in all capital letters, carrying a sense of urgency that made my heart stop completely. "Nia, do not eat or drink anything they bring you. I just checked your financial records. DeAndre increased your life insurance premium yesterday morning. He removed the suicide and accidental death clauses. If you die, he gets $10 million immediately." I stared at the glaring uppercase letters on my screen, feeling a physical weight pressed down on my chest. $10 million. That was the price tag my husband had placed on my life. I quickly deleted the messages from my screen and locked the iPad, shoving it deep into my bag. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to clench them into tight fists until my fingernails dug painfully into my palms. I could not let him see my terror. If DeAndre suspected for even a single second that I knew about the insurance policy or the mistress, he might not wait for another opportunity to poison me. He might just smother me with a hospital pillow right here and claim my heart simply gave out. The doctor cleared me for discharge the following afternoon. DeAndre wheeled me out of the hospital, sliding glass doors, playing the role of the attentive husband to absolute perfection for the nurses. He carefully helped me into the passenger seat of his leased Mercedes, a luxury vehicle I paid the monthly note for, and draped a soft cashmere blanket over my legs. During the silent 30-minute drive back to our sprawling Buckhead estate, I kept my eyes closed, resting my head against the cool leather window. I let my breathing remain shallow and erratic. Every time he glanced over at me, trying to gauge my condition, I made sure he saw a broken, terrified woman who had lost her fight. When we finally arrived home, the sheer size of our house felt suffocating. He tried to guide me toward our primary bedroom upstairs, his grip on my arm just a fraction too tight. I stopped at the foot of the sweeping staircase, leaning heavily against the wooden banister, and let out a pathetic coughing fit. "I cannot manage the stairs yet," DeAndre, I whispered weakly, leaning against the wall. Leaning. "My chest still hurts too much from the breathing tubes. I think I should stay in the downstairs guest suite for a few days so I do not disturb your sleep with my coughing and tossing around." He hesitated for a fraction of a second before a sickeningly sweet smile spread across his handsome face. "Of course, baby," he agreed far too quickly. "Whatever you need to recover." He was absolutely thrilled. Having me isolated in the guest wing meant he could freely text his pregnant mistress and make his shady business calls upstairs without having to hide in the bathroom. It gave him the illusion of total control. But what he did not realize was that it gave me the exact geographical advantage I desperately needed. The downstairs guest suite had a private set of French doors that opened directly onto the back patio, hidden completely from the main living areas and the street view. At exactly 2 in the morning, long after I heard his heavy footsteps retreat to the master bedroom upstairs, I unlocked those French doors and slipped out into the humid Georgia night air. Tasha was already waiting in the shadows by the pool house holding a sleek black briefcase. She slipped inside, moving silently in her dark designer clothes. We did not turn on any overhead lights, relying only on the dim yellow glow of my small desk lamp. Tasha wasted absolutely no time. She spread thick stacks of densely typed legal documents across the guest room table. Her face was set in a mask of pure, lethal focus. "He really thought he could outsmart us," Tasha whispered, her eyes blazing with absolute fury. "I spent the last 12 hours drafting the tightest irrevocable blind trust in the state of Georgia. As soon as your signature hits these lines, every single corporate share, real estate deed, and liquid asset in your name transfers instantly to a holding company managed solely by the trust. You will technically own nothing on paper, but you will control absolutely everything through the trust parameters." "What about the commercial loan he forged my signature on?" I asked, picking up the heavy gold fountain pen she offered me. Tasha smiled a sharp, predatory grin that reminded me why she was the most feared corporate litigator in Atlanta. "That is the absolute best part, Nia. By moving your business assets entirely out of your personal estate, before the bank finalizes the loan payout, you completely invalidate his primary collateral. When the underwriters do their final sweep on Monday morning, they will find absolutely nothing attached to his name or your shared marital estate. The loan will collapse immediately, and the private lenders will come to collect the secondary collateral." "Which is what exactly?" I asked, signing the first page with a steady hand. "Keisha signed as his guarantor," Tasha replied, sliding the next page toward me. "He used his sister's luxury condo to back the illicit loan. When this blows up, she loses her home." I paused for a split second, remembering how Keisha had stepped over my dying body just to grab a sparkling water, complaining that I was ruining the vibe. I pressed the pen back down and signed the remaining documents without a single shred of hesitation. By 3 in the morning, it was officially done. My entire empire was legally shielded. Tasha packed the paperwork back into her briefcase, giving my hand a tight, reassuring squeeze before disappearing back into the night. I was no longer a victim waiting for the next blow. I was a loaded gun waiting for the perfect moment to fire. The next morning, I shuffled into the kitchen wearing oversized sweatpants and a messy bun, making sure I looked utterly defeated. DeAndre was standing by the expensive espresso machine, texting furiously on his phone. When he heard my slippers drag across the marble tile, he quickly flipped the phone face down on the counter and put his mask of deep concern back on. "Morning, baby," he said softly, pouring me a cup of hot chamomile tea. "You look a little better today." I took the mug, holding it tightly with both hands, and forced a single tear to slip down my cheek. I looked down at the floor, letting my voice tremble just enough to sound genuine. "I am so sorry, DeAndre," I said softly. He blinked clearly, caught off guard by my sudden apology. Sorry for what he asked, cautiously stepping closer. For how I acted in this hospital, I lied, my voice breaking perfectly. "I was just so scared and disoriented from the oxygen deprivation. I know you were just trying to protect the business and keep our family afloat. You have been carrying so much weight and trying to be the man of the house, and I was horrible to you in front of your mother." His posture relaxed immediately. His ego was so massive it easily swallowed the bait whole. He stepped closer, wrapping his arms around my shoulders, holding me against his chest. "It is okay, Nia," he murmured, kissing the top of my head. "We are a team. I am just trying to take care of you and make sure everything runs smoothly while you heal." I sniffled and looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes, playing the submissive wife role to the hilt. "I want to make it right," I said. "I want to sign the papers you brought to the hospital, but I want to do it properly. Why do not you invite your mother and Keisha over for dinner tomorrow night? I want to formally apologize to them for being so difficult, and I will sign the transfer documents in front of everyone. It will show them that we are a united front, and that I finally respect your leadership." DeAndre's eyes lit up with sheer greedy triumph. He could barely contain his excitement. He truly thought he had completely broken my spirit. "That is a beautiful idea, baby," he said, squeezing my shoulders a little tighter. "I will text them right now. They will be so happy to hear you say that. I will even cook your favorite meal to celebrate." I smiled back at him, letting the comforting warmth of the teacup mask the absolute ice running through my veins. The following afternoon, the house was filled with the rich smell of roasting garlic and expensive herbs. DeAndre was completely in his element, playing the gracious host and the perfect husband. He had ordered expensive floral arrangements for the dining table and laid out our finest china. I stayed out of his way, pretending to rest in the guest suite, while I mentally prepared for the absolute war that was about to unfold in my dining room. About an hour before his family was scheduled to arrive, I sat on the edge of the guest bed and opened my phone. A sudden thought had struck me. When I originally remodeled the kitchen 3 years ago to indulge his culinary obsession, I had the contractors install a comprehensive smart home security system. DeAndre hated complex technology, so he never paid attention to the tiny, sleek camera lenses integrated seamlessly into the upper cabinetry and the overhead stainless steel range hood. They were motion-activated, designed to record high-resolution video directly to a hidden cloud server I managed exclusively from an app on my phone. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the security application and navigated to the archived footage from the night of my allergic reaction. I selected the exact timestamp from 6 in the evening right before he served me the mushroom risotto. I pressed play. The video buffered for a second before filling my phone screen with crystal clear 4K resolution. There was DeAndre standing perfectly illuminated by the kitchen sink. He reached into his trouser pocket and pulled out my familiar yellow EpiPen. He did not accidentally drop it. He did not mishandle it. I watched in cold, horrifying detail as my husband uncapped the device, pressed it firmly against the inside edge of the stainless steel sink, and forcefully discharged the entire vial of life-saving epinephrine straight down the drain. He then calmly rinsed the sink, watching the clear liquid wash away before he wiped his hands on a decorative kitchen towel. He turned toward the stove, humming a cheerful tune, and began grating the deadly black truffle over my dinner. I paused the video right on his face, zooming in on his features. He was smiling. He was actually smiling as he threw my life away. I locked my phone screen, plunging the room back into silence. The confirmation of his pure malice washed over me, not with heat, but with absolute freezing clarity. There was no room left for doubt, no room left for sorrow, or the naive hope that my husband was simply a desperate man making a terrible mistake. He was a predator, and I was the prey he thought he had successfully cornered. I carefully deleted the smart home application from my home screen, hiding it deep within a secured, encrypted folder where his prying eyes would never find it. I stood up from the edge of the guest bed, smoothed down the fabric of my oversized sweatpants, and walked over to the vanity mirror. I looked at my reflection. I applied a thin layer of pale concealer under my eyes to enhance the dark circles and the illusion of total exhaustion. I needed to look like a woman who was entirely defeated, a woman who was ready to surrender everything just to find some peace. The sharp melodic chime of the front doorbell echoed loudly through the massive estate. I heard DeAndre rushing down the hardwood hallway, his footsteps light and eager like a child on Christmas morning. The heavy mahogany front door swung open, and the loud, unmistakable voices of his mother and sister immediately filled the grand foyer. They walked into my home as if they had just purchased the entire property. Shirley was wearing a bright yellow tailored pantsuit, her heavy floral perfume preceding her like a toxic cloud. Keisha trailed right behind her, wearing a tight sequin designer dress I was absolutely certain she had bought using the emergency supplementary credit card I had yet to officially cancel. They did not ask how I was feeling. They did not bring flowers or a simple get-well card. They did not even bring a cheap bottle of wine. They brought nothing but their towering, suffocating entitlement. Keisha walked straight past the formal living room and headed directly for my custom glass-enclosed wine cellar. I stood quietly at the edge of the shadowed hallway, watching as she bypassed the standard table wines and reached straight for a bottle of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon that I had personally purchased in Napa Valley for my 5-year business anniversary. It was a $600 bottle. She popped the cork with zero hesitation, pouring massive brimming glasses for herself and her mother. DeAndre stood by the kitchen island, beaming with sheer pride, as he watched his family consume my hard-earned wealth, acting as the gracious provider of things he did not actually own. When I finally stepped fully into the warm light of the kitchen, they stopped talking. Shirley looked me up and down, taking a long, slow sip of the expensive red wine. "Well, look who decided to join the land of the living," Shirley said, her tone dripping with intense condescension. "You still look terribly washed out, Naya, but at least you managed to get out of that bed. I suppose that is a start for you." I forced a meek, trembling smile, keeping my head lowered slightly to play the part. "Thank you for coming, Shirley," I said, my voice deliberately soft and breathy. "I really appreciate you both being here tonight. I know I was difficult at the hospital." Keisha rolled her eyes, taking a huge gulp of the Cabernet, leaving a dark red stain on the rim of the crystal glass. "Yeah, well, DeAndre said you finally came to your senses," she muttered, wiping her mouth with the back of her manicured hand. "It is about time you realized who wears the pants in this marriage. You cannot just run a household like you run those little software developer meetings, Nia." DeAndre clapped his hands together loudly, cutting the tension with a bright fake smile. "All right, ladies, let us keep the energy positive," he announced, playing the peacemaker. "I am going to pull the garlic herb roast out of the oven. Mom, why do not you come taste the sauce and tell me if it needs more salt?" Shirley eagerly followed him deeper into the kitchen to supervise, leaving Keisha and me entirely alone in the long hallway. I turned to walk toward the formal dining room, pretending I needed to arrange the linen napkins, but Keisha quickly stepped right in front of me, physically blocking my path. She leaned in close, the harsh smell of alcohol and cheap lip gloss overwhelming my senses. "You know, Nia, I really have to hand it to you," Keisha sneered, her voice low and venomous. "I never in a million years thought you would actually submit to him. I thought you would fight him tooth and nail to keep your independent boss babe routine going. But I guess almost dying on the floor really puts things into perspective, right? You finally learned your place." I looked at her, keeping my facial expression completely blank. "Submit," I repeated quietly, letting the word hang in the air. Keisha smirked, tossing her heavy braids over her shoulder with an arrogant flick of her wrist. "Do not play dumb with me. DeAndre told us everything this morning. He told us all about the commercial bank loan and how you are finally signing over the business rights tonight so he can execute his vision. And honestly, it is exactly what you should have done years ago. A real man needs to lead his family. You have been suffocating his potential with your little tech success for way too long, always making him feel small. She took another sip of wine, her eyes gleaming with sheer, unabashed greed. And with this new capital, he is not just saving his first restaurant. He is opening a second location right in the heart of Midtown Atlanta, a luxury steakhouse with a VIP lounge. He already has the lease agreements drawn up and ready to sign. He promised me the general manager position. We are going to be wealthy, Nia. Real wealth, not just your boring computer money. We are going to be a legacy family. My boring computer money. The absolute audacity of this woman was truly staggering to witness in person. She was aggressively bragging about a second restaurant location funded entirely by a fraudulent bank loan secured heavily against my business assets and her own luxury condo. She was standing in my house drinking my vintage wine, insulting my life's work, and she had absolutely no idea that her beloved brother was driving her straight off a financial cliff. I wanted to laugh right in her face. I wanted to tell her that by this time tomorrow, she would be packing her designer bags in the dark because the private lenders were coming to foreclose on her home. But I tightly held my tongue. I simply nodded, acting as though her cruel words had effectively put me in my proper place. "You are right, Keisha," I murmured, looking down at the hardwood floor. "DeAndre has a very grand vision for the future. I should not stand in his way anymore. I just want peace." Keisha smiled, a nasty, triumphant grin flashing her white teeth. "I am so glad we are finally on the exact same page," she said, bumping her shoulder roughly against mine as she pushed past me into the living room. I took a deep, steadying breath, centering my mind, and followed her into the room. The formal living room had been entirely rearranged for this exact moment. The decorative coffee table books, the expensive candles, and the floral centerpieces had all been cleared away. In the dead center of the massive glass coffee table sat the thick, intimidating stack of legal documents the notary had left behind at the hospital. DeAndre walked in from the kitchen, untying his canvas cooking apron and tossing it aside. He looked like a king who had just successfully conquered an entire continent. He motioned gracefully for everyone to sit down. Shirley took the center of the plush velvet sofa, crossing her legs elegantly and resting her wine glass on her knee. Keisha sat perched on the armrest, swinging her leg back and forth with impatient excitement. DeAndre stood right next to the coffee table, pointing firmly to the empty leather chair directly across from him. "Have a seat, baby," he commanded gently. His voice was soft and honeyed, but the underlying threat in his tone was crystal clear. I walked over slowly, lowering myself into the heavy chair, keeping my shoulders slumped. The trap was perfectly set. They were all watching me like a pack of starving wolves waiting for the wounded deer to finally collapse. DeAndre picked up the legal documents, tapping the bottom edges against the glass table to align the pages perfectly. He flipped past the dense legal jargon straight to the very last page where the blank signature line awaited my name. "Nia," he began, his voice thick with a perfectly rehearsed fake emotion. "We have been through a truly terrible ordeal this week. I almost lost you. The thought of living my life without you absolutely terrified me. And it made me realize that we have not been operating as a true partnership. I have let you carry way too much of the financial burden for this family. But that ends tonight. By signing these papers, you are allowing me to step up and be the provider and the protector I was always meant to be. You are protecting our future. You are protecting our legacy." He reached into the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a heavy gold fountain pen. He stepped forward, holding it out to me. His eyes locked onto mine, practically daring me to cause a scene in front of his mother. His lips curled into that exact same smug, victorious smile I had watched him wear on the hidden camera footage while he washed my life down the kitchen sink. "For the family, right, babe?" he asked smoothly, pushing the pen closer to my hand. The living room was completely dead silent. Shirley was watching me with hawk-like intensity, waiting for me to surrender my crown. Keisha was smirking, taking another arrogant sip of my expensive wine. I looked down at the heavy gold pen resting in his outstretched hand. I reached out and took it, my fingers deliberately brushing against his warm skin. I looked down at the legal documents that were meticulously drafted to strip me of everything I had ever bled for. Then I looked up at my deeply critical mother-in-law. I looked at Keisha with her greedy, expectant eyes. and finally I looked directly into my husband's eyes. The frightened, broken, submissive wife completely vanished from my face. I straightened my spine, pressing my shoulders back against the leather chair. I let a slow, wide, entirely genuine smile spread across my face. Absolutely, I said, my voice ringing with crystal clear, unwavering authority. But before I sign away my life's work, I think we should watch a quick family video. I reached into the deep pocket of my oversized sweatpants and pulled out the sleek black remote control for the massive 85-inch television mounted above the marble fireplace. Before anyone could process my words, I pressed the power button. The screen immediately illuminated the dimly lit living room, casting a harsh, bright blue glow across their confused faces. DeAndre frowned, the heavy gold pen still suspended in the air between us. "What are you doing, Nia?" he demanded, his voice instantly dropping its sweet, supportive facade. "Turn that off and sign the papers right now." I did not answer him. I simply pressed play on the smart home application I had seamlessly mirrored to the screen just moments before I walked into the room. The video buffered for a fraction of a second before playing in stunning, uncompressed 4K resolution. The audio kicked in loud and perfectly clear thanks to the premium surround sound speakers installed in the ceiling. There was DeAndre on the screen, standing in our kitchen less than 48 hours ago. The room watched in absolute dead silence as the digital version of my husband casually pulled the yellow EpiPen from his trouser pocket. The high-definition microphone picked up the distinct sharp click of the safety cap being removed. Everyone in the formal living room heard the loud hissing sound as he pressed the needle against the inside edge of the stainless steel sink and forcefully discharged the epinephrine straight down the drain. Shirley leaned forward, squinting at the large screen, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. "What on earth is he doing?" she whispered tightly, clutching her wineglass. "Why is he emptying your medicine?" Then the video showed DeAndre picking up his cell phone from the counter. He dialed a number and put it on speaker, tossing it onto the kitchen island while he walked over to the open refrigerator. "Hey, baby," a woman voice echoed loudly through the living room speakers. It was his vendor supply contact. DeAndre on the screen laughed, a dark, chilling sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand straight up. "Hey, beautiful," he replied, pulling the expensive black truffle from a brown paper bag. "I am prepping the risotto right now. I just took care of the insurance policy hurdle. The EpiPen is completely empty. By tomorrow morning, I will be collecting the bag and we can finally go house hunting in Buckhead." "I love you too," he said smoothly before hanging up the call. The video continued mercilessly. The screen showed him meticulously grating the deadly fungus into the hot pan, whistling a cheerful, upbeat tune while he knowingly prepared a lethal dose for his wife. He even tasted the simmering sauce, licking the wooden spoon with a highly satisfied grin. He looked directly at the hidden camera lens for a split second, completely unaware of its existence, adjusting his collar before scooping the poisoned food onto my favorite dinner plate. The atmosphere in the formal living room shattered into a million jagged pieces. The arrogant smugness completely vanished from Keisha, face replaced instantly by sheer unadulterated horror. She slowly lowered her wineglass, her jaw dropping open in a silent scream. She looked back and forth between the television and her brother, her eyes wide with terror as she realized she had stepped over my dying body while he casually watched me choke to death. Shirley let out a strangled, suffocating gasp. The crystal goblet slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered violently against the expensive hardwood floor, sending dark red wine splattering across the pristine white rug like fresh pools of blood. "My baby," she stammered, pointing a shaking manicured finger at the screen, her heavy gold bracelets rattling. "My boy, what did you do? What is this?" DeAndre stood completely frozen, his eyes wide with wild, animalistic panic. He looked at the television, then at me, his brain clearly struggling to comprehend how I had obtained the damning footage. He had been so incredibly arrogant, so focused on his grand master plan, that he had completely forgotten about the advanced security system he had personally demanded I install to protect his expensive, imported espresso machines. "Stop it!" he yelled, his voice cracking with sudden violent desperation. "Shut it off!" He lunged across the glass coffee table, knocking over the expensive floral centerpiece and scattering the meticulously prepared legal documents everywhere. He scrambled toward the stone fireplace, grabbing the thick black power cord connecting the television to the wall outlet. With a guttural, animalistic roar, he yanked it as hard as he physically could. The thick cord snapped with a loud pop, the massive screen went instantly black, and the surround sound abruptly cut off, leaving the room in a heavy, suffocating silence. He stood there, his chest heaving violently, clutching the torn electrical cord in his fists like a weapon. He was breathing heavily, his perfectly tailored suit jacket wrinkled, his flawless, charming facade entirely destroyed. But it was far too late. The absolute truth was already out bare and incredibly ugly in the exact center of the room. I remained perfectly still in my leather chair, crossing my legs and resting my hands in my lap. "You missed a spot cleaning the sink," I noted calmly, my voice steady and cold. For a brief moment I thought he might drop to his knees and beg for mercy. I thought he might cry and claim temporary insanity or stress. But a true narcissist never apologizes when they are finally caught in the light. They simply attack. The sheer panic in his eyes instantly morphed into pure, unhinged, violent rage. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. He threw the broken cord to the floor and took a highly threatening step toward me. "You owe me this!" he screamed, his voice echoing harshly off the high, vaulted ceilings. "You completely emasculated me, Nia. Every single day of our marriage, you paraded your massive success right in my face. You bought this giant house. You bought the luxury cars. You funded my culinary school just so you could hold it over my head and constantly remind me that I was absolutely nothing without your tech money. Do you have any idea what it feels like to be a man trying to build an empire while his wife treats him like a pathetic charity case?" He paced back and forth, kicking the scattered legal documents across the floor, acting like a wounded victim instead of an attempted murderer. "You never respected me," he continued, his voice dripping with venom. "You never let me lead this family. You made me look weak to my friends and my investors. You always had the final say because you held the checkbook. So yes, I found someone who actually respects me as a man. I found a woman who looks up to me and is giving me the son you never wanted to have because you were too busy coding your stupid software to be a real wife. I deserve that $10 million life insurance money. I earned every single penny of it for putting up with your condescending attitude for 4 miserable years." Shirley was weeping loudly into her hands, rocking back and forth on the velvet sofa, entirely unable to process the monster she had raised. Keisha remained entirely mute, paralyzed by the sudden violent shift in her brother's demeanor. She shrank back into the cushions, terrified of the man standing in front of her. DeAndre stopped pacing and pointed a shaking finger right at my face. He laughed, a bitter, unhinged sound that echoed terribly in the large room. "But you know what, Nia, it does not even matter. You think you won because you have a little hidden video clip. You think you can just kick me out to the curb and keep all your precious money while I go to jail. You forgot one tiny critical detail." He stepped closer to my chair, leaning down with a cruel, twisted expression of triumph. "Even without your signature on these transfer papers, I am already a co-owner of this estate. I am your legal husband. I already leveraged this joint home and Keisha luxury condo to secure the massive restaurant money from the private lenders. The funds are clearing on Monday morning. So go ahead and call the police. Send me to prison. I have already drained the equity out of absolutely everything we own. You will be paying off my massive debt for the rest of your miserable life." He stood up straight, smiling with cruel, twisted satisfaction, believing he had delivered the ultimate checkmate. "I am taking you down with me." I did not flinch. I did not cry. I did not even blink. I simply looked past his shoulder toward the grand foyer. Right on absolute cue, the heavy front door swung open with a resounding, commanding thud. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of expensive designer heels echoed down the hardwood hallway. Tasha walked into the formal living room, stepping gracefully over the spilled red wine and shattered crystal glass. She was wearing a flawless crimson-red power suit that screamed pure authority. Under her arm, she carried a thick red leather folder. She stopped right next to DeAndre, looking him up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. She adjusted her designer glasses and smiled a truly terrifying smile. Actually, DeAndre, Tasha said, her voice slicing through the thick tension like a perfectly sharpened blade. You have not leveraged anything. Tasha did not flinch when DeAndre took a threatening step toward her. She simply stood her ground in the center of my ruined formal living room, exuding the kind of terrifying absolute confidence that only a highly paid corporate litigator could wield. She slowly unbuttoned the front of her tailored crimson blazer and pulled a pair of sleek reading glasses from her pocket, sliding them onto her face. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" DeAndre demanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of leftover rage and sudden paralyzing uncertainty. "Get out before I call the police for trespassing." Tasha laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that completely lacked humor. "You are in absolutely no position to call the authorities, DeAndre," she replied smoothly, opening the thick red leather folder she carried under her arm. "And for the record, this is not your house anymore. It has not been your house for exactly 48 hours. DeAndre scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest, trying to regain his dominant posture. "You are completely bluffing. I am on the deed. I am her legal husband. Everything she owns is marital property, and I already used it to secure my restaurant loan. You cannot just magically erase my name from the estate." "You really thought you were the smartest person in the room," Tasha said, shaking her head with an expression of pure pity. "It is a very common mistake for deeply mediocre men who underestimate brilliant women. While you were busy buying imported truffles and playing nurse at the hospital yesterday morning, my client and I were executing a highly complex legal maneuver." She pulled a thick stack of stapled papers from the red folder and tossed them onto the glass coffee table right next to the fraudulent notary documents DeAndre had tried to force me to sign. Filed with the state of Georgia and officially stamped by a federal judge, Tasha announced, her voice echoing with finality. "A completely impenetrable, blind, irrevocable trust. As of 2 days ago, every single corporate share real estate deed, liquid asset, and savings account with Nia name on it was legally transferred into a holding company. Nia technically owns nothing on paper. The trust owns it all, and you, DeAndre, have absolutely zero legal ties to the trust." DeAndre stared at the documents on the table, his jaw ticking violently. "That is illegal," he stammered, a thick bead of sweat rolling down his temple. "You cannot just hide marital assets during a marriage without my consent. A judge will overturn that in a second." Tasha smiled, a predatory grin showing all her teeth. "They are not hidden assets, DeAndre. They were premarital business assets that Nia aggressively protected, and a judge would only overturn it if the transfer was done with malicious intent against a spouse. But considering we have crystal clear 4K video footage of you attempting to murder my client to collect a $10 million life insurance payout, I highly doubt any judge in the state of Georgia is going to worry about your marital property rights. You are going to be fighting a criminal attempted murder charge, not a civil divorce suit." The color completely drained from DeAndre's face. He took a stumbling step backward, bumping into the edge of the velvet sofa. "But the bank," he whispered, his eyes darting frantically around the room. "The bank already processed the commercial loan application. I used this house as the primary collateral. The money is in escrow." Tasha removed her glasses and pointed them directly at him. "That is the truly beautiful part about commercial underwriting, DeAndre. They double-check everything right before they release the funds. When the bank underwriter ran the final title search on this estate this morning, they discovered that the primary collateral had vanished into a corporate trust. Couple that with the fact that you failed to provide Nia notarized signature today because she wisely refused to sign your forged paperwork, the bank instantly flagged the entire application as highly fraudulent." DeAndre grabbed his chest, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. "The loan application fell through," he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The $2.5 million is gone." "Completely gone," Tasha confirmed happily. "The bank canceled the transaction entirely." "But here is the real problem, DeAndre. You did not just owe the bank. You owe private lenders. You owe a man named Silas." The moment Tasha said the name Silas, DeAndre's knees physically buckled. He collapsed onto the armrest of the sofa, his face buried in his hands. He knew exactly what private lenders did when a massive multi-million-dollar payment fell through. Silas and his associates are not bound by banking regulations. Tasha continued, pacing slowly across the rug. When they found out the primary collateral vanished, they did not just cancel the debt. They immediately executed the secondary collateral clause you provided them. Private lenders always take their pound of flesh, DeAndre. You know this. Shirley, who had been weeping silently on the sofa, suddenly looked up, her mascara running in thick black lines down her cheeks. What secondary collateral? She asked, her voice trembling violently. What else did you give them, DeAndre? Tasha stopped pacing and slowly turned her gaze toward Keisha. Keisha was still pressed against the back wall, clutching her designer bag, her eyes wide with shock from the video of the poisoning. She had been completely silent, watching her brother criminal empire crumble. Tasha looked at Keisha with a mixture of disgust and dark satisfaction. You really love bragging about your luxury condo in Buckhead, do you not, Keisha? The one with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the rooftop pool? Keisha swallowed hard, her hands shaking. Leave my apartment out of this, she snapped weakly, trying to maintain her usual arrogant attitude. My apartment has absolutely nothing to do with his restaurant business. Actually, it has everything to do with it, Tasha replied, taking a single piece of paper from her red folder and holding it up in the air. You have terrible credit, Keisha. You have not held a steady job in 3 years. When you bought that condo, your brother had to co-sign the mortgage to get you approved. His name is legally attached to your deed. Keisha shook her head rapidly, stepping away from the wall. No, she said, her voice rising in pitch. He just co-signed. That does not mean he owns it. He promised me he would take his name off the paperwork once my credit score improved. Well, he lied, Tasha stated bluntly. Because his name was still on the deed, he used your luxury condo as the secondary collateral to secure the loan from Silas and his loan shark associates. But a co-signer signature is not enough for secondary collateral. He needed the primary resident to agree. Tasha walked across the room and shoved the piece of paper directly into Keisha's trembling hands. Read it, Tasha commanded. Keisha looked down at the document. Her eyes scanned the bold text and the heavy black ink at the bottom of the page. It was a collateral forfeiture agreement. At the very bottom, right next to DeAndre's signature, was her own name. I did not sign this, Keisha whispered, tears instantly welling in her eyes. I swear I never saw this paper in my entire life. I would never put my home up for his failing restaurant. We know you did not sign it, Tasha said, her voice turning completely icy. DeAndre forged your signature, Keisha, just like he forged Nia's signature on the bank documents. He gambled your entire home to pay off his illicit debts because he was so confident he was going to successfully murder his wife and use her life insurance money to quietly pay the loan sharks back before you ever found out. Keisha let out a raw, agonizing gasp. She looked at the forged signature on the page and then looked at her brother, who was still sitting on the armrest, refusing to make eye contact with her. Because the bank loan fell through today, Silas and his associates triggered this exact document, Tasha explained, showing absolutely no mercy. The debt defaulted at 5:00 this evening. The private lenders officially seized the deed to your condo, Keisha. They filed the paperwork with the county clerk an hour ago. No, Keisha screamed, dropping the piece of paper to the floor. No, you cannot do this. It is my home. I decorated it. I live there. You do not live there anymore, Tasha corrected, stepping back to give Keisha a clear line of sight to her brother. The bank is foreclosing on your home tomorrow morning at exactly 8:00. The sheriff will be there to change the locks and physically throw your designer clothes out onto the pavement. You are completely homeless, Keisha, and it is entirely your brother's fault, brother. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Keisha stood frozen, staring at DeAndre. The brother she had worshipped, the man she had just defended in the hallway, the man she claimed was the rightful leader of this family, had completely destroyed her life without a second thought. He had used her as a disposable pawn in his greedy, violent game. DeAndre finally looked up, his eyes red and desperate. Keisha, I am so sorry, he pleaded, holding his hands up defensively. I was going to pay it back. I swear to God, I was going to pay it back as soon as the insurance money cleared. I just needed a little more time. The sound Keisha made was not a cry. It was a vicious, guttural shriek of pure primal rage. She dropped her heavy designer handbag, letting it crash against the hardwood floor. Without a single word of warning, she lunged across the living room. She tackled DeAndre with such terrifying force that they both went crashing backward over the velvet sofa and onto the shattered glass and spilled wine on the rug. "You ruined my life!" Keisha screamed wildly, swinging her fists at his face. "You stole my house, you forged my name, you manipulative piece of garbage. I hate you." She grabbed the collar of his expensive tailored shirt and ripped it violently, hearing the fabric tear and the buttons scatter across the floor. She slapped him across the face, her manicured nails leaving deep, bloody scratches down his cheek. DeAndre tried to push her off, but he was too weak and too panicked to fight back effectively. "Stop it!" Shirley shrieked, jumping up from the sofa. "Get off him, Keisha! You are hurting him!" Shirley threw herself into the violent tangle of limbs, desperately trying to pull her daughter off her golden boy son. Keisha shoved her mother backward with brutal force, knocking Shirley onto her hands and knees in the puddle of wine. "Do not touch me," Keisha roared, her eyes wild and unhinged. "He stole everything from me and you are still defending him. You are both dead to me." I sat perfectly still in my leather chair, crossing my legs and watching the physical destruction of the family that had tried to destroy me. They were tearing each other apart right in the middle of my living room, their toxic loyalty completely shattered by their own overwhelming greed. Tasha walked over and stood right next to my chair, looking down at the chaotic, bloody mess on the floor. She pulled her cell phone from her blazer pocket, her thumb hovering over the screen. "Are we ready for the grand finale?" Tasha asked me quietly. I looked at my husband, bleeding and cowering on the floor beneath his screaming sister. I smiled. "Make the call." Tasha tapped a single button on her phone screen, holding the device to her ear for barely 3 seconds. "It is done," she said quietly, before sliding the phone back into her crimson blazer pocket. She stood beside my leather chair, her arms crossed perfectly over her chest, watching the absolute physical and emotional carnage unfold on my living room floor. Shirley finally found her footing, slipping slightly on the spilled vintage Cabernet Sauvignon that now soaked the expensive white rug. Her designer pantsuit was ruined, her heavy makeup was smeared across her face, and her perfectly styled hair was disheveled. She looked down at DeAndre, who was clutching his bleeding cheek, where Keisha had deeply gouged him with her manicured nails. The golden boy, the infallible patriarch of the family, the man Shirley had endlessly praised to high heaven and demanded I submit to, was currently reduced to a pathetic, whimpering mess on the floor. Shirley's chest heaved violently as the reality of the situation fully crushed her. All her archaic speeches about submitting to a husband, leadership about letting a man control the finances and make the executive decisions, completely evaporated in the face of her own daughter impending homelessness. She marched right up to DeAndre, her heels crunching over the shattered crystal glass. He looked up at her, his eyes wide and begging for his mother to step in and save him, like she always did when he made mistakes as a child. He expected her to coddle him. Instead, Shirley raised her right hand and slapped him so hard, the sharp, violent crack echoed loudly over the ringing silence of the room. It was not a gentle, motherly correction. It was a vicious, full-bodied strike that snapped his head entirely to the side and left a bright red handprint across his jaw. "You stupid, arrogant boy!" Shirley hissed, her voice shaking with an unprecedented, visceral fury I had never heard from her before. "You stole from your own flesh and blood. You gambled your sister's shelter to fund a restaurant you do not even know how to run. You used our family name to pay off street thugs and loan sharks. You are an absolute disgrace to your father's memory." Keisha was sobbing hysterically on the velvet sofa, burying her face deep in her hands, mourning the immediate loss of her luxury lifestyle, her penthouse views, and her pristine credit score. DeAndre slowly pushed himself up from the floor, entirely ignoring his weeping mother. His tailored suit was completely ruined, ripped at the collar by his sister, and stained with expensive wine and his own blood. He looked frantically around the formal living room, realizing that his loyal army had completely abandoned him. His mother had physically turned on him. His sister absolutely hated him. He was completely cornered with no legal or financial way out. So he turned his attention back to his final target: me. He staggered toward my leather chair, his breathing ragged and deeply uneven. Since physical intimidation had completely failed and financial violence was entirely off the table, he resorted to the absolute lowest form of psychological warfare a desperate man could muster. Nia, listen to me, he pleaded, his voice dropping into a sickeningly desperate manipulative whine. You have to stop this right now. You have to tell Tasha to call the bank and fix the commercial loan. If I go down, the entire family goes down. It will be a public scandal. Do you really want to be the bitter, lonely divorced woman who sent her own husband to a state penitentiary? He wiped a fresh smear of blood from his jaw, his eyes turning remarkably dark and malicious. He leaned closer, pointing a shaking, aggressive finger at my face. I only did this because you forced my hand, Naya. You were so deeply obsessed with your software company and your endless developer meetings that you forgot how to be a real wife. You emasculated me every single day. You never gave me a real family. You never gave me a child to carry on my legacy. But she is. He pointed wildly at the blank television screen referencing the damning phone call with his mistress we had all just watched. She respects me as a man. She looks up to me. And she is carrying my son. A son, Nia. The one absolute thing you could never give me no matter how much money you made. I am going to be a father. You cannot send the father of an innocent unborn child to prison. If you have a single shred of human decency left in your cold corporate heart, you will call the bank, authorize the asset transfer, and let me walk away to raise my boy. He stood there, chest heaving, truly believing that weaponizing my past fertility struggles and throwing his unborn child in my face would somehow guilt me into funding his grand escape. For a long, agonizing moment, the room was completely silent, except for the pathetic sound of Keisha muffled sobbing in the background. And then I laughed. It started as a low, quiet chuckle deep in my chest and quickly grew into a loud, entirely genuine laugh that filled the high vaulted ceilings of the living room. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated liberation. DeAndre recoiled violently, staring at me as if I had completely lost my mind. You really think you are the main character in some tragic, misunderstood romance movie, do you not? I asked, wiping a tiny tear of pure amusement from the corner of my eye. You actually believe this mysterious woman truly loves you. You genuinely think she is sitting in a cheap apartment somewhere, faithfully rubbing her belly, waiting for her strong, handsome provider to bring home the stolen millions so you can ride off into the sunset together. DeAndre's jaw clenched tightly, his fists balling at his sides. She loves me, he spat fiercely, defensive. She is completely loyal to me. She is a real woman, not a cold, calculating machine like you. I looked up at Tasha, who was already adjusting her designer glasses and smiling that terrifying predatory smile that struck fear into the hearts of opposing corporate counsel. Tell him, Tasha, I said, leaning comfortably back in my leather chair, crossing my legs. Tasha stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor, demanding absolute attention. Oh, she is definitely calculating, Tasha said, her voice smooth and conversational. Just not in the romantic way you originally hoped. You see, when Nia found those deleted text messages synced to her iPad yesterday morning, we did not just run a financial background check on your massive hidden debts. We also ran a full comprehensive background check on the phone number saved in your phone under vendor supply. DeAndre swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing nervously as the remaining color completely drained from his bruised face. What did you do? He whispered, taking a slight step backward. I paid your lovely pregnant girlfriend a little personal visit yesterday afternoon. Tasha continued, casually inspecting her immaculate manicure. I drove across town and walked right up to her apartment. I sat on her incredibly cheap faux leather couch, and I laid out the absolute harsh reality of her current situation. I told her that your fancy restaurant was totally bankrupt. I told her that you owed $2.5 million to highly dangerous loan sharks who were actively looking to collect. And most importantly, I told her that you were about to be arrested for the premeditated attempted murder of your wealthy wife, meaning all that beautiful life insurance money you promised her was nothing but a complete delusional fantasy. DeAndre shook his head rapidly, refusing to believe his perfect escape plan was unraveling before his eyes. No, he stammered, his voice cracking. She would never listen to you. She knows I have a solid plan. She trusts me. She knew you were a rapidly sinking ship, DeAndre. Tasha corrected sharply, her tone slicing through his denial. And opportunistic rats always flee a sinking ship. The very moment she realized you were completely broke and headed straight for a maximum security state penitentiary, her undying loyalty vanished instantly into thin air. She did not shed a single tear for you. Or she did not defend your honor. She only cared about saving herself from being legally implicated as an accessory to attempted murder and federal insurance fraud. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, looking directly into his panicked, terrified eyes. So I made her a generous counteroffer. I said, my voice dropping to a deadly serious, uncompromising register. I offered her exactly $50,000 in crisp, clean cash, a relocation fee. Enough money to pack her bags, move completely out of state, and start a brand new life for her and her baby, far away from a broke, convicted felon. DeAndre stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of the glass coffee table. You gave her money. He choked out, his eyes wide with disbelief. She actually took your money. She took it eagerly, I replied with a cold, victorious smile. She practically snatched the certified cashier check right out of Tasha's hand. But the money came with a very strict legal condition. In exchange for the 50 grand, she had to hand over her completely unlocked cell phone. Not just digital screenshots, DeAndre. The actual physical device. Every single text message you ever sent her. Every voice note where you openly discussed the truffle poison. Every digital footprint proving you researched my allergy, mapped out the life insurance policy changes, and orchestrated this entire assassination attempt just to steal my wealth. She sold you out for 50 grand and a one-way plane ticket to Texas. She is already gone. He stood there utterly and completely destroyed. The entire foundation of his massive, fragile ego was pulverized into dust. His own mother had physically slapped him. His sister absolutely despised him. His wife had legally outmaneuvered him, and the loyal mistress he thought worshipped the ground he walked on had happily sold his freedom to the highest bidder the very second the money dried up. He had absolutely no one and nothing left in this world. His restaurant dream was gone. His family legacy was a joke. The unborn son he had just tried to weaponize against me was hundreds of miles away, safely funded by my own bank account. He dropped to his knees right there in the middle of the ruined, formal living room, amidst the shattered crystal glass, the torn, fraudulent legal documents, and the spilled vintage wine. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to finally beg for mercy, or perhaps to scream in total defeat, but the words never managed to escape his throat. Suddenly, the dark, formal living room was flooded with alternating bursts of bright, aggressive color. Brilliant, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the massive front windows, cutting sharply through the darkness of the front lawn and casting wild, frantic shadows across the high walls. The heavy, deep sound of multiple car doors slamming shut echoed loudly from the driveway outside, followed immediately by the sharp static crackle of a police radio. Shirley gasped loudly, pressing both hands tightly over her mouth in sheer horror. Keisha froze on the sofa, her eyes wide with fresh, paralyzing panic. DeAndre remained perfectly still, on his knees, staring blankly at the flashing lights painting the walls around him, finally realizing that the phone call Tasha had made just minutes ago was not a bluff to the bank. It was a direct line to the local authorities. I calmly reached over to the small marble side table sitting next to my leather chair. I picked up my crystal glass of sparkling water and took a long, refreshing sip, letting the cold liquid soothe my still healing throat. I looked down at the pathetic, broken man who had tried to end my life for a payout. "Oh, look," I said, my voice perfectly steady and light. "Your ride is here." The heavy oak front door did not just open, it was practically breached. Half a dozen Atlanta Police Department officers poured into the grand foyer of my estate. Their heavy tactical boots trampled mercilessly over the delicate Persian rugs, bringing the harsh reality of the outside world straight into my meticulously decorated home. The flashing red and blue lights from their cruisers outside threw wild, chaotic shadows against the high vaulted ceiling. For a brief second, the sheer, overwhelming presence of law enforcement brought a stunning, absolute silence to the room. Even Keisha stopped her hysterical sobbing, pressing her back flat against the velvet sofa in pure shock. Which one of you is DeAndre? The lead detective demanded, his voice a booming baritone that left absolutely no room for negotiation. His hand rested casually but deliberately on his utility belt. No one had to point. DeAndre was still kneeling on the floor amidst the shattered crystal glass and spilled vintage wine, looking exactly like the guilty cornered criminal he was. Two uniformed officers immediately flanked him, grabbing him roughly by the shoulders and hauling him aggressively to his feet. DeAndre did not fight back. The arrogant, charming restaurateur who had confidently plotted my murder just 2 days ago was completely gone, replaced by a trembling, pathetic coward. He let out a weak, whimpering sound as the officers violently twisted his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping tightly around his wrists echoed through the formal living room like a final, definitive gunshot. "DeAndre, you have the right to remain silent," the lead detective recited loudly, pulling a laminated card from his vest. "You are being placed under arrest for premeditated attempted murder, felony insurance fraud, and aggravated forgery. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "I am innocent!" DeAndre cried out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail as the officers began to physically drag him toward the grand foyer. "Nia, tell them I am innocent. Tell them it was an accident." I did not move a single muscle. I stood up from my leather chair and walked slowly toward the entryway, watching him struggle against the grip of the officers. I followed them out onto the expansive front porch, stepping into the cool, humid Georgia night air. The scene on my front lawn was nothing short of a cinematic spectacle. At least 4 police cruisers were parked diagonally across my perfectly manicured driveway, their light bars completely illuminating the upscale Buckhead neighborhood. In a community where reputation and pristine public image meant absolutely everything, DeAndre was being completely destroyed. Every single one of my wealthy neighbors was standing outside. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington from across the street were standing on their lawn in their expensive silk robes, staring in sheer disbelief. The president of our neighborhood homeowners association was standing on his driveway with his phone out, openly recording the entire humiliating ordeal. DeAndre carefully crafted facade as the elite, successful black entrepreneur was dead and buried. He was being paraded across the grass in a torn, bloody suit, crying hysterically for his mother, while the entire neighborhood watched his absolute downfall. They shoved him roughly into the back of the police cruiser and slammed the heavy door shut, completely cutting off his desperate screams. The cruisers backed out of the driveway, their sirens wailing loudly as they sped off into the night, carrying my husband to the Fulton County Jail. I stood on the porch for a moment longer, letting the cool breeze wash over my face, enjoying the first true breath of freedom I had taken in 4 years. When I finally turned around and walked back inside the house, the atmosphere had shifted from chaotic panic to a deep, suffocating desperation. Keisha was still curled in a ball on the sofa, completely unresponsive to the world around her. But Shirley was standing in the center of the ruined living room, her eyes wide and bloodshot. As soon as I crossed the threshold, Shirley completely abandoned whatever tiny shred of pride she had left. The woman who had spent the entire week insulting my career, mocking my independence, and demanding that I blindly submit to her son, suddenly threw herself forward and collapsed heavily onto her knees, right at my feet. She reached out with trembling hands, aggressively grabbing the fabric of my oversized sweatpants. "Nia, please," she begged, her voice a ragged, agonizing sob. "You have to help him, Nia. You have to call your bank right now. You have millions of dollars. It is just pocket change to you. You can easily pay his bail tonight. You can hire the absolute best defense attorney in Atlanta to make these awful charges go away." I looked down at her hands gripping my clothes and felt an overwhelming wave of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Let go of me, Shirley," I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. She did not let go. Instead, she gripped the fabric even tighter, looking up at me with tears streaming down her ruined face. "He is your husband before God." "Nia," she cried out, attempting to weaponize religion when all her other manipulations had completely failed. "You stood at the altar, and you took a sacred vow, for better or for worse. You cannot just abandon the man you married. God commands us to forgive. He made a terrible mistake, but he is still your family." I reached down and forcibly peeled her manicured fingers off my pants, taking a deliberate step backward to put distance between us. My vows did not include being intentionally poisoned over a plate of mushroom risotto, Shirley, I replied, staring down at her pathetic kneeling form. And do not you dare speak to me about family or God. You stood in my hospital room yesterday and told me I deserved to be sick because I worked too hard. You told me to hand over my entire life savings to a man you knew was a complete financial failure. Nia, please, he is my only son. She wept, pressing her face against her hands. He is exactly what you made him, Shirley, I said, delivering the words with cold, flawless precision. You raised a parasite and you fully expected me to be his willing host forever. You spent his entire life coddling his massive ego and making endless excuses for his profound mediocrity. You taught him that women exist solely to fund his wild dreams, clean up his massive messes, and tolerate his blatant abuse. You built a king without a kingdom, and you sent him into my house to steal mine. I gestured broadly around the beautiful, expansive living room that I had paid for with my own blood, sweat, and tears. He thought he was entitled to my wealth because you raised him to believe the world simply owed him everything. And now he is going to a federal penitentiary where his entitlement means absolutely nothing. He is going to spend the next 20 years locked in a concrete box, and it is entirely your fault for never teaching him how to be a real man. Shirley gasped, clutching her chest as if my words had physically struck her. You are a cold, heartless monster, she hissed, her sorrow instantly morphing back into bitter, toxic hatred. You planned this. You wanted to destroy him. I did not destroy him, Shirley. His own insatiable greed destroyed him, just like it is going to destroy you. I turned my head and looked at Tasha, who was leaning casually against the archway of the kitchen, watching the entire exchange with a look of deep, professional satisfaction. Tasha, I called out, keeping my eyes locked firmly on Shirley. Tell her about the townhouse in Smyrna. Shirley froze. The bitter hatred on her face flickered instantly, returning to a state of deep, terrified confusion. What about my townhouse? She asked, her voice shaking. Tasha smiled, stepping fully into the living room and opening her red leather folder once again. She pulled out a crisp, white document adorned with an official county seal. You love bragging to all your church friends about your beautiful 3-bedroom townhouse, do you not? Shirley? Tasha asked, her tone dripping with intense sarcasm. You love telling everyone how your highly successful son bought it for you 3 years ago to make sure his mother was always comfortable. Shirley swallowed hard, refusing to break eye contact with the legal document in Tasha's hand. DeAndre did buy it for me, she insisted weakly. He paid the down payment. DeAndre did not have a single dime. 3 years ago, Tasha corrected sharply. He was dead broke, working as a line cook and begging Nia to fund his first restaurant. Nia bought that townhouse, Shirley. She used a private corporate LLC to purchase the property in cash, so your massive ego would not be bruised by the fact that your daughter-in-law was officially supporting you. DeAndre simply took the credit. Shirley's mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish out of water. She looked back and forth between me and Tasha, completely unable to process the magnitude of the lie she had been living. The LLC that legally owns the property you currently reside in is entirely controlled by Nia's newly formed irrevocable trust. Tasha continued, taking a pen from her pocket and signing the bottom of the document with a swift, aggressive flourish. And as the legal administrator of that trust, I have been officially instructed to terminate your month-to-month tenancy. Tasha dropped the formal eviction notice right onto the floor directly in front of Shirley, kneeling knees. You have exactly 30 days to pack up your belongings and vacate the premises, Tasha stated coldly. If you are not completely moved out by the 1st of next month, I will personally have the county sheriff drag you and your furniture out onto the front lawn just like they did to your son tonight. Shirley let out a devastating hollow wail, collapsing forward until her forehead rested against the hardwood floor. In the span of a single hour, her entire royal family had been completely decimated. Her son was facing decades in prison. Her daughter was losing her luxury condo to dangerous loan sharks. And she was being legally evicted from the only stable home she had left. They had tried to strip me down to the bone, and instead they had entirely devoured themselves. Get out of my house, I said, my voice echoing with absolute finality. Both of you, right now. Tasha did not give them a moment to argue. She walked over, grabbed Shirley firmly by the upper arm, and hauled her to her feet. She then marched over to the sofa and pulled a completely catatonic Keisha up by her ruined designer dress. Tasha practically dragged the two weeping broken women out of the formal living room, down the long hallway, and shoved them forcefully out the front door. The heavy mahogany door slammed shut, and the loud, distinct click of the deadbolt sliding into place echoed through the quiet house. The overwhelming silence that followed was heavy but incredibly peaceful. I stood in the middle of the room looking at the scattered documents, the broken television cord, and the massive dark red wine stain soaking into the white rug. It was a terrible mess, but it was finally my mess alone. Tasha walked back into the living room, running a hand over her perfectly styled hair. She let out a long, heavy sigh of relief. Well, she said, a genuine smile finally breaking across her face. That was officially the most satisfying legal consultation I have ever conducted in my entire career. I laughed softly, walking over to the side table to pick up my glass of water. Thank you, Tasha. For absolutely everything. I owe you my life. Before Tasha could respond, a sharp vibrating sound interrupted the quiet moment. Tasha reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her cell phone. She looked down at the illuminated screen, and her smile instantly vanished completely, replaced by a look of tight, intense focus. She looked up at me, her eyes dark and serious. It is an encrypted, restricted number, she said, her voice dropping to a low, cautious whisper. But the area code matches the one I traced during the background check on his debts. She held the ringing phone out toward me. The bright screen illuminated the space between us. It is Silas, Tasha said. The private lender. He is calling. Tasha placed her cell phone down on the center of the glass coffee table and tapped the speaker icon. The line clicked sharply, and a deep, gravelly voice echoed through the quiet, ruined living room. DeAndre, you are completely out of time, Silas stated, his tone flat and utterly devoid of mercy. I do not care what federal bank you claim you are waiting on. Your deadline passed an hour ago. The secondary collateral on the luxury condo has already been executed, but it does not cover the massive interest you owe me. I want the rest of my money by midnight, or I am taking the restaurant property entirely and sending my associates to handle you personally. I leaned forward in my leather chair, resting my elbows on my knees. DeAndre is not available right now, Silas, I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. He is currently sitting in the back of a police cruiser on his way to the Fulton County Jail for premeditated attempted murder. He is completely bankrupt, and he is never getting out. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. The sound of a lighter flicking and a sharp inhale of smoke filtered through the speaker. Who exactly is this? Silas asked, the underlying threat in his voice shifting into cautious curiosity. This is Nia, I replied. I am the wealthy wife he tried to murder to pay off the massive debt he owes you, and sitting right next to me is my corporate attorney who just legally blocked his fraudulent bank loan and ensured you will never see a single dime of marital money from him. Another pause. Silas let out a low, dark chuckle. Well, Nia, I have to say I appreciate a woman who handles her business, but your husband being a complete idiot does not magically erase the paper I hold. He signed over the commercial deed to his restaurant as my primary collateral. The property is mine now. It is going to be a massive legal headache to liquidate a distressed asset tied to a high-profile attempted murder case, but I will get my money eventually. That is exactly why I am talking to you, Silas, I countered smoothly, keeping my tone strictly professional. You are a businessman. You deal in liquid cash, not prolonged, messy courtroom battles over commercial real estate tied to a federal criminal investigation. If you try to take possession of that restaurant, the district attorney will freeze the property as evidence of his financial motive for murder. It will be tied up in litigation for the next 5 years. You will be holding on to completely dead weight. What is your play here, Nia? Silas asked, his voice dropping an octave, realizing I was not just calling to gloat. I want to buy the paper, I stated firmly. I will purchase his entire commercial restaurant debt from you right now. I will pay you exactly 20 cents on the dollar in clean, untraceable corporate funds transferred immediately from my private holding company. You walk away tonight with guaranteed cash in hand and absolutely zero legal liability. In exchange, you digitally transfer the deed and the entire debt portfolio to my name. I become the sole legal owner of his restaurant, and you never have to hear my husband's name ever again. Silas was quiet as he mentally calculated the sheer efficiency of the deal. He knew I was absolutely right about the criminal investigation, freezing the asset. Taking a loss on the principal was far better than fighting a federal prosecutor for a cursed building. Send the digital transfer documents to my secure email. Silas finally agreed, his tone reflecting a begrudging respect. Once the wire transfer hits my offshore account, the restaurant belongs to you, Nia. Do whatever you want with it. Tasha smiled fiercely, tapping the screen to end the call. She immediately opened her laptop and began drafting the expedited transfer agreement. By midnight, the wire transfer had successfully cleared. For a fraction of the cost, I had just legally purchased the absolute center of my husband's massive ego. The restaurant he loved more than he ever loved me was now entirely my personal property. The next 48 hours were a chaotic, beautiful blur of absolute eradication. When the sun rose the following morning, I did not stay in bed crying. I hired a team of elite commercial locksmiths to descend upon my Buckhead estate. Every single door, every gate, and every security code was completely changed and upgraded. I erased his biometric access from the smart home system, effectively turning the property into an impenetrable fortress. Once the house was secured, I drove my luxury SUV directly to my flagship beauty salon in Midtown Atlanta. For the past 2 years, Keisha had been drawing a highly inflated salary from my company payroll under the completely fabricated title of brand ambassador. She rarely showed up to work, and when she did, she spent the entire day taking selfies in the VIP lounge and bossing my hardworking stylists around. When I walked through the double glass doors of the salon, the entire staff fell silent. Keisha was sitting in a plush leather styling chair, sipping an iced coffee and complaining loudly to a junior assistant about how her brother was being unfairly framed. She looked up and froze when she saw me striding across the marble floor. "Nia," she stammered, her usual arrogance completely replaced by sheer panic. "I can explain everything. I did not know what he was doing. I swear. The sheriff came to my condo this morning. They changed the locks. I have absolutely nowhere to go. You have to let me stay here and keep my job. I need the paycheck, Nia, please." I stopped right in front of her chair, looking down at her perfectly manicured nails and her expensive designer clothes. "You do not work here, Keisha," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet salon. "You never truly worked here. You were a highly paid charity case because I felt sorry for your complete lack of ambition. But my charity ends today." I turned to the 2 massive private security guards I had hired that morning, who were standing by the front desk. "Escort her off the premises," I instructed coldly. "If she ever steps foot within 500 feet of this building again, call the police and have her arrested for criminal trespassing." Keisha began to sob hysterically, dropping her iced coffee as the security guard stepped forward and grabbed her by the arms. She screamed my name, begging for forgiveness as they physically dragged her out the front doors and deposited her onto the busy Atlanta sidewalk. I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no pity, no sorrow. I simply turned to my salon manager, ordered a fresh round of coffee for the staff, and went straight back to work. Later that afternoon, I returned to my quiet, secured house to finish the cleansing process. I walked upstairs to the massive custom master closet. DeAndre was a man obsessed with appearances. His side of the closet was filled with rows of custom Italian suits, imported silk ties, hundreds of pairs of designer shoes, and velvet boxes holding expensive watches I had foolishly purchased for him over the years. I went down to the garage and brought up a massive roll of heavy-duty black contractor trash bags. I did not fold his clothes. I did not carefully pack them into neat cardboard boxes for storage. I grabbed his thousands of dollars worth of Tom Ford and Gucci suits right off their velvet hangers and shoved them violently into the thick black plastic bags. I threw his expensive leather loafers and his imported colognes in right on top, hearing the glass bottles shatter inside the bags, releasing a suffocating cloud of expensive fragrance. It was deeply physically exhausting work, but I had never felt more incredibly energized in my entire life. I dragged 8 heavy black trash bags down the sweeping hardwood staircase across the grand foyer and straight out the front door. I dumped them unceremoniously onto the absolute edge of the curb, right next to the city garbage cans. Let the neighborhood watch. Let the sanitation workers take it all to the local landfill where it belonged. I was completely erasing his physical existence from my sanctuary. That evening, I poured myself a single glass of expensive red wine and sat out on my back patio, watching the sunset over the heated pool. The house was finally peaceful. The air felt incredibly light. Suddenly, the secure landline inside the kitchen began to ring. I walked inside and looked at the caller identification screen. It was an automated message from the Fulton County Correctional Facility. I pressed the accept button and put the phone on speaker, resting my hands on the marble kitchen island. "This is a collect call from an inmate," the automated female voice announced. "DeAndre, do you accept the charges?" I smiled, taking a slow sip of my wine. "Yes, I accept," I replied clearly. The line clicked, and the heavy, chaotic background noise of the county jail filtered through the speaker. DeAndre's voice came through the line, sounding incredibly rough, exhausted, but desperately trying to maintain a facade of intimidating control. "You think you won, Nia?" he sneered, his voice dripping with pure toxic hatred. "You think because you threw a little temper tantrum and got me locked up that this is over? It is not over. I am going to hire the most ruthless shark defense attorney in the state of Georgia. I am going to drag your precious, pristine name right through the mud in open court." I let him rant, listening to his pathetic delusions of grandeur. And when I beat this ridiculous charge, he continued, raising his voice over the sounds of other inmates shouting in the background, "I am serving you with divorce papers. And since we are legally married, I am taking exactly half of everything. Half your software company, half your beauty salons, and half of that massive house. You are going to be writing me alimony checks for the rest of your miserable life." I took another calm sip of my wine, letting the silence stretch out just long enough to make him incredibly uncomfortable. "Are you quite finished, DeAndre?" I finally asked, my tone conversational and completely unbothered. "Because you seem to be operating under a few massive legal misconceptions. First, you are not hiring a shark attorney. You have absolutely zero money, and the public defender assigned to your case is already begging you to take a plea deal. Second, there is no marital estate to divide. Date. The irrevocable trust owns everything. You own absolutely nothing." I heard his breathing hitch over the phone line, the reality of his total financial ruin slowly piercing through his thick, arrogant skull. And finally, I continued, leaning closer to the speaker. "You are facing a mandatory minimum of 20 years in a federal penitentiary for the premeditated attempted murder of your spouse. In the state of Georgia, a felony conviction of that magnitude grants me the legal right to file for an immediate at-fault unilateral divorce. I do not need your signature, DeAndre. I do not need your permission. The judge will grant the divorce, and you will officially be a convicted felon with no wife, no money, and no family." "You cannot do this to me," he yelled, his voice cracking with sudden, terrifying panic. "Nia, you cannot leave me in here. I am your husband. You stopped being my husband the second you poured that poison onto my plate," I whispered, my voice turning to absolute ice. "Oh, and DeAndre, there is one last thing you should probably know before your designated phone time runs out." What he choked out, his breathing rapid and panicked. "I bought your debt from Silas last night," I told him, delivering the final crushing blow with absolute flawless precision. "I bought the commercial paper for 20 cents on the dollar. I am the sole legal owner of your precious restaurant property now. And you will be thrilled to know that I already hired a demolition crew. I am bulldozing your pathetic culinary dream to the ground on Monday morning to build the parking lot for my brand new flagship luxury spa." "Nia, no," he screamed, his voice breaking into a truly guttural, agonizing wail of pure devastation. "Nia, please do not touch my restaurant. Please." I reached out and pressed the red button, completely cutting off his desperate, agonizing screams. The kitchen fell back into beautiful, perfect silence. I picked up my glass of wine, walked back out to the patio, and watched the stars finally begin to shine. 6 months passed in the blink of an eye. The quiet peace of that evening on my patio felt like a distant memory as I walked through the heavy mahogany doors of the Fulton County Courthouse. The air inside the courtroom was thick and heavily air-conditioned, carrying the distinct, sterile smell of floor wax and old paper. The trial of the state of Georgia versus DeAndre had officially begun, and the media gallery was completely packed. DeAndre sat at the defense table looking absolutely nothing like the arrogant, charming man I had married. Without my bank accounts to fund his luxury lifestyle, he had aged a decade in 6 months. His state-appointed public defender was a tired-looking man who tried his absolute best to spin a narrative of a tragic misunderstanding. During the opening statements, the defense attorney paced in front of the jury box, pointing a finger in my direction. He painted a picture of me as a bitter, vengeful, wealthy woman. He claimed I was a ruthless corporate tech mogul who actively tried to crush her struggling black entrepreneur husband. He told the jury that DeAndre was simply overwhelmed by financial pressure, and that the black truffle was an honest culinary mistake, blown entirely out of proportion by a wife looking for an excuse to steal his business and lock him away. It was a pathetic, desperate defense strategy meant to prey on the jury emotions. But I was not there to play an emotional game. When the district attorney called me to the witness stand, I did not wear dark colors to look like a mourning victim. I wore a perfectly tailored cream-colored suit. I walked up to the stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. When I sat down, I looked directly at the 12 men and women in the jury box. I did not cry. I did not dab my eyes with a tissue or tremble. I relied entirely on absolute, undeniable facts. The district attorney guided me through the timeline of our marriage, but I controlled the narrative. I eloquently broke down the severe financial abuse. I did not just tell them DeAndre was bad with money, I showed them the bank statements. I walked the jury through the exact timeline of his restaurant, failing the massive amounts of illicit debt he accrued with Silas and the forged commercial loan documents. I explained the mechanics of the life insurance policy he had altered just 24 hours before he served me dinner. I made the complex financial motives incredibly easy for every single juror to understand. Then the district attorney introduced Exhibit A. The lights in the courtroom dimmed, and the massive projector screen pulled down over the judge bench. They played the 4K security footage from my kitchen. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The jury watched in absolute horror as my husband discharged my life-saving EpiPen down the sink drain and laughed on the phone with his mistress about collecting the bag. They watched him grate the poison into my food with a cheerful smile. I watched the faces of the jurors. Several women covered their mouths in shock. 2 of the men shook their heads in pure disgust. The defense attorney narrative of the struggling, misunderstood entrepreneur completely evaporated in that exact moment. When it was the defense attorney's turn to cross-examine me, he tried to rattle my cage. He asked if I was angry that my husband had a mistress. He asked if I set up the blind trust maliciously to leave him penniless. I answered every single question with a calm, steady voice. I told the defense attorney that I was not angry about the infidelity. I was angry that he tried to murder me to fund it. I explained that protecting my premarital assets from a man actively committing wire fraud was not malicious, it was simply intelligent business. By the time I stepped down from the witness stand, the public defender looked entirely defeated. But the absolute climax of the trial came on the 3rd day when DeAndre insisted on taking the stand in his own defense. His massive ego simply could not handle sitting quietly while his reputation was systematically dismantled. He believed he could charm the jury just like he had charmed me years ago. He sat in the witness box wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit provided by the county, playing the role of the devoted husband who had made a terrible mistake. He cried. He swore he forgot about my allergy. He claimed the phone call on the video was taken entirely out of context. That is when Tasha stood up. Because the financial crimes involved my corporate assets, Tasha had been sworn in as a special prosecutor assisting the district attorney case. She buttoned her sharp crimson blazer, picked up a legal pad, and walked slowly toward the witness stand. She did not start by asking him about the night of the poisoning. She started by attacking the one thing he cared about more than his freedom, his pride. DeAndre, Tasha began, her voice projecting clearly across the silent courtroom. You consider yourself a highly successful chef, do you not? DeAndre puffed out his chest slightly, adjusting his cheap tie. Yes, I do, he answered confidently. I attended the best culinary school in the country. Paid for entirely by your wife, Tasha quickly added, not missing a single beat. But let us talk about your business acumen. Is it true that your restaurant was losing nearly $40,000 a month because you refused to buy standard ingredients and instead insisted on ordering imported luxury goods you could not actually afford? Objection, the defense attorney called out. Irrelevant. Goes to the motive of his massive financial debt, Your Honor, Tasha replied smoothly. The judge overruled the objection. DeAndre's jaw clenched. I was building a premium brand, he snapped, gripping the edges of the witness stand. You have to spend money to make money, but it was not. Your money, was it, DeAndre? Tasha pressed, stepping closer. You forged your wife's signature on a $2.5 million loan because your premium brand was an absolute catastrophic failure. And when that loan fell through, you lost the building entirely. Did you know that Nia bought your debt from the loan sharks for pennies on the dollar? I watched DeAndre's face turn a dangerous shade of red. The charming facade was beginning to crack. Yes, I know that, he hissed through his teeth. Did you also know that she bulldozed your restaurant 3 months ago to build a parking lot? Tasha asked, a cruel, satisfied smile playing on her lips. DeAndre half stood up out of his chair, his eyes bulging. You did not have to bring that up, he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Tasha. That was my dream, and she destroyed it just to spite me. She destroyed it because it was a monument to your total incompetence, Tasha fired back, raising her voice to match his energy. Just like your mistress abandoned you because of your incompetence. How did it feel, DeAndre, to know that the woman carrying your supposed legacy happily took $50,000 to hand over every single text message proving you planned to murder your wife? The mention of the mistress taking the money and running was the final explosive trigger. DeAndre completely lost his mind. The mask of the grieving accidental widower shattered into a million jagged pieces right in front of the judge and the jury. Shut up! He roared, his voice echoing violently off the courtroom walls. He slammed both of his fists down onto the wooden railing of the witness box with such terrifying force that the court reporter physically jumped out of her chair. She pushed me to this, he screamed, pointing wildly at me where I sat at the prosecution table. She controlled every single dollar. She made me beg like a dog for my own restaurant. She thought she was so much better than me with her tech money and her fancy meetings. I was the man of the house. I was supposed to be the one in charge. She owed me that money. I earned that insurance payout for putting up with her disrespectful attitude. The courtroom erupted into absolute chaos. The gallery gasped collectively. The judge began banging his wooden gavel repeatedly, demanding order in the court. 2 bailiffs immediately rushed forward, placing their hands securely on their holstered weapons, ready to physically tackle DeAndre if he tried to leap over the witness box. DeAndre stood there, his chest heaving, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged, narcissistic rage. He had just confessed to the motive right in open court. He had just showed the jury exactly who he truly was. A violent, entitled parasite who believed murder was a perfectly justified response to a bruised ego. Tasha did not even flinch. She simply looked up at the judge, then turned to the completely horrified jury box. No further questions, Your Honor, she said softly, walking gracefully back to her seat next to me. The defense rested their case immediately after that disastrous testimony, knowing there was absolutely nothing left they could say to salvage the situation. The closing arguments were brief. The district attorney reminded the jury of the video, the forged documents, and the violent outburst they had just witnessed with their own eyes. The judge gave the jury their instructions and they were dismissed to deliberate. Usually a trial with financial fraud, forgery, and attempted murder charges could take days for a jury to sort through. I prepared myself for a long, grueling wait in the hard wooden benches of the courthouse hallway. But I did not have to wait long. Exactly 2 hours later, the heavy wooden door to the deliberation room swung open. The bailiff walked out and handed a folded piece of paper to the judge. The court clerk announced that the jury had reached a verdict. The gallery quickly scrambled back into their seats, the reporters pulling out their notepads. I stood up next to Tasha, smoothing the front of my cream-colored blazer. Across the aisle, DeAndre stood next to his defeated public defender. He was trembling visibly, sweating profusely. his eyes darting wildly around the room as the reality of his impending doom finally settled over him. The judge, a stern older man with white hair, looked down at the paperwork in front of him. He did not show a single ounce of emotion. He looked up and addressed the jury box. Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? The judge asked, his voice carrying a heavy, solemn weight. The jury foreman, a middle-aged woman wearing a simple blue sweater, stood up from the front row. She looked directly at DeAndre and then looked at the judge. Yes, Your Honor, we have, she replied firmly. The courtroom was so silent, I could hear my own steady heartbeat in my ears. The culmination of all the betrayal, the poisoning, the financial warfare, and the emotional destruction was resting right inside the envelope in her hands. The judge nodded. Please hand the verdict to the bailiff so it may be read for the official court record. The bailiff stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing loudly against the polished hardwood floor of the courtroom. He took the folded white paper from the trembling hands of the jury foreman and carried it over to the elevated wooden bench. The judge took the document, unfolding it with a slow, deliberate motion that seemed to stretch the tension in the room to an absolute breaking point. He adjusted his reading glasses and scanned the page, his expression remaining completely unreadable. He handed the paper down to the court clerk, a stern woman who adjusted her microphone and cleared her throat. DeAndre stood up at the defense table. His public defender placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, but DeAndre shook it off his chest, rising and falling in rapid, panicked breaths. He gripped the edge of the wooden table so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. In the case of the state of Georgia versus DeAndre, the clerk began, her voice ringing with clear, absolute authority. On the charge of aggravated forgery, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. A sharp collective gasp rippled through the gallery behind us. DeAndre flinched as if he had been physically struck, closing his eyes tightly. On the charge of felony insurance fraud, the clerk continued, not pausing for the reaction, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. DeAndre's legs began to tremble visibly. He swayed on his feet, his arrogant posture completely collapsing under the crushing weight of the words. And on the charge of premeditated attempted murder in the first degree, the clerk read, her voice rising slightly to cut through the growing murmur of the crowd. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. DeAndre let out a sharp, suffocating gasp. His knees gave out entirely. He collapsed heavily into his wooden chair, burying his face in his hands as a loud, agonizing sob tore through his throat. The courtroom erupted into a chaotic frenzy of noise. Reporters scrambled to type on their phones while members of the gallery whispered fiercely to one another. The judge struck his heavy wooden gavel 3 times, demanding immediate order. Silence in my courtroom. The judge barked, his voice booming fiercely over the microphone. The room quieted down instantly, leaving only the pathetic sound of DeAndre weeping at the defense table. Given the egregious nature of these crimes, the overwhelming evidence presented, and the completely unhinged violent outbursts the defendant displayed on the witness stand, this court sees absolutely no reason to delay sentencing, the judge announced, looking directly down at my broken husband. DeAndre looked up, his face stained with tears and completely drained of color. Your Honor, please, he whimpered weakly. Stand up when the judge is addressing you, the bailiff commanded, stepping directly behind DeAndre and forcing him to his feet. You sat in this courtroom and attempted to portray yourself as a victim of financial stress, the judge said, his tone laced with deep, profound disgust. But the evidence clearly showed a man driven by insatiable greed and a terrifying sense of entitlement. You violated the most sacred trust a person can give you. You plotted to murder the woman you swore to protect, simply to fund a lavish lifestyle you did not earn. You are a highly dangerous, manipulative individual who poses a severe threat to society. The judge picked up his pen, leaning forward over the high bench. It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 25 years in the Georgia State Penitentiary. Because of the premeditated nature of the violent crime, this sentence will be served without the possibility of early parole. You are remanded immediately to the custody of the state. The gavel slammed down with a resounding, violent crack that echoed through my very bones. It was over. The absolute finality of the sound washed over me like a cleansing rain. 2 bailiffs immediately grabbed DeAndre by the arms, pulling his hands behind his back to secure the heavy steel handcuffs. He did not fight them. He dragged his feet, looking back over his shoulder toward the prosecution table, his eyes searching desperately for mine. I did not give him a final look of pity. I simply turned away, gathering my coat and thanking the district attorney for his exceptional work. 1 week later, I drove my luxury SUV out to the Fulton County Correctional Facility. DeAndre was scheduled to be transferred to the maximum security state penitentiary the very next morning. This was the absolute last time he would ever be held in a local facility. I walked through the metal detectors, surrendered my phone to the front desk, and followed a stern corrections officer down a long, windowless concrete hallway that smelled strongly of bleach and stale sweat. I was led into a stark visitation room. It was nothing but a row of cheap metal stools bolted to the floor, separated by a thick wall of smudged bulletproof glass. I sat down on the hard metal seat, crossing my legs and waiting patiently. A few minutes later, a heavy steel door on the opposite side of the glass buzzed loudly and swung open. DeAndre walked into the room. The sight of him was genuinely jarring. The charming, handsome restaurateur who used to spend hours applying expensive imported cologne and picking out custom silk ties was entirely gone. He was wearing a bright orange oversized jumpsuit that washed out his complexion. His hair was unkempt, his beard was completely overgrown, and his face looked deeply hollowed out. In just 6 months, he had aged a decade. The utter lack of luxury and the crushing reality of his massive sentence had stripped away every single ounce of his designer bravado. He shuffled slowly over to the stool directly across from me. He sat down heavily, refusing to meet my eyes. He picked up the heavy black plastic telephone receiver attached to the wall. I picked up my receiver and held it to my ear. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Only the faint static of the recorded line hung between us. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and completely empty. "Why did you come here, Nia?" he asked, his voice sounding like dry, cracked gravel. "Did you just come here to gloat?" "I did not come to gloat," I answered, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "I came to close the chapter. Tomorrow you go to state prison, and I go back to my life. I will never see you or think about you ever again." He swallowed hard, looking down at his bright orange lap. He gripped the phone receiver so tightly, his knuckles turned white. "I just do not understand," he whispered, shaking his head slowly. "I have sat in this cell for 6 months, thinking about absolutely nothing else. I do not understand why you went through all of this. All of what I asked. The security cameras, the blind trust, buying my debt from Silas, tearing my entire family apart right in the middle of the living room." He listed, his voice cracking with lingering pain. "You are brilliant, Nia. You are a genius with money and technology. The second you found those text messages on your iPad, the second you knew I was broke and had a mistress, you could have just packed a bag. You could have hired Tasha to serve me with divorce papers and walked entirely away. You had the money to just leave. Why did you stay and let me host that dinner? Why did you orchestrate my absolute destruction?" I looked at him through the thick, reinforced glass. He still fundamentally misunderstood the entire situation. He still thought he was a victim of my wrath rather than a victim of his own actions. "Because simply leaving you would have been a kindness you absolutely did not deserve, DeAndre," I explained, my voice dropping to a cold, uncompromising register. "If I had just packed a bag and filed for divorce, you would have spun a brilliant narrative for your mother, your sister, and your investors. You would have told everyone that your cold corporate wife abandoned you when your business hit a rough patch. You would have played the tragic, struggling entrepreneur." He blinked, staring at me through the smudged glass, completely captivated by my brutal honesty. And more importantly, I continued, keeping my eyes locked firmly on his. "You would have never learned a single thing. You would have manipulated another woman into funding your delusions. You would have destroyed someone else's life to feed your massive, fragile ego." I leaned closer to the glass, resting my free hand against the cool metal ledge. "I did not destroy you, DeAndre. I simply stopped protecting you from yourself. I let you host that dinner because I needed you to feel absolutely confident in your grand plan. By staying, I let your own insatiable greed build the bars of your cage. Every lie you told, every signature you forged, every ounce of poison you grated onto my plate was a brick you laid in your own prison. You did this to yourself. I just made sure the world watched you do it." He stared at me, tears finally welling up and spilling over his dark, hollow cheeks. He pressed his free hand against the glass, his fingers trembling violently. "I am so sorry, Nia," he sobbed, his voice breaking into a pathetic, desperate whine. "I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me. I have absolutely nothing left." I reached into my designer handbag. "I have one last thing to show you before I go," I said, pulling out a crisp, glossy 8x10 photograph. I held the photograph up, pressing it completely flat against the bulletproof glass so he could see every single detail. It was a picture taken just yesterday afternoon. The sky was bright blue and the sun was shining. In the center of the photo was a massive, beautiful, newly constructed building. It featured sleek modern architecture, giant floor-to-ceiling glass windows, and lush, expensive landscaping. A bright pink silk ribbon was cut across the front entrance. Above the double glass doors, a massive gold sign gleamed in the sunlight reading, "The Nia Wellness and Aesthetics Center." DeAndre's eyes darted across the photograph, taking in the pristine luxury of the brand-new building. Then his eyes drifted down to the street sign, perfectly visible in the corner of the picture. He recognized the address immediately. It was the exact physical location where his beloved high-end restaurant used to stand before I bought the deed and sent the bulldozers in. He let out a sharp, agonizing gasp, dropping the telephone receiver entirely. It clattered violently against the metal wall, dangling by its thick metal cord. He pressed both of his hands against the glass, staring at the photograph of his completely eradicated dream, replaced entirely by my thriving empire. He rested his forehead against the thick glass and began to weep loudly, his shoulders shaking with profound, absolute devastation. The realization that he had handed me the very ground he used to walk on completely broke his spirit. I did not say goodbye. I calmly put the glossy photograph back into my handbag. I placed the black telephone receiver neatly back onto its cradle, cutting off the sound of his agonizing sobs completely. I stood up from the hard metal stool, turned my back on the glass partition, and walked out of the visitation room. I walked down the long concrete hallway, retrieving my belongings from the front desk. I stepped out of the county jail and into the bright, warm Georgia sunshine. Behind me, the massive, heavy iron doors of the facility slammed shut with a loud, definitive metallic clank. The sound did not startle me. It sounded like pure, absolute closure. I walked toward my car, pulling my sunglasses from my purse and sliding them onto my face. I took a deep breath of the fresh, humid air, filling my lungs completely without a single ounce of pain or restriction. For the first time in 4 long years, I felt completely light. 1 year later, that feeling of lightness had transformed into something entirely different. It had solidified into pure, untouchable power. I stood on the sweeping glass balcony of the Nia Wellness and Aesthetics Center, looking down at the massive charity gala unfolding in the grand ballroom below. The space where DeAndre once envisioned a dark VIP lounge for his failing steakhouse was now flooded with bright, natural light and decorated with thousands of white orchids. Tonight was not just a grand opening for my flagship location. It was a fully funded gala dedicated entirely to providing massive business grants for young Black female entrepreneurs in the greater Atlanta area. The center itself was a masterpiece of modern design, featuring state-of-the-art aesthetic treatment rooms, holistic wellness spaces, and a collaborative workspace for creatives. I watched dozens of brilliant, driven women networking, laughing, and building their own empires. They were exchanging business cards and sharing their visions. I had intentionally created a luxury space where our ambitions were loudly celebrated instead of being treated like a threat to a fragile male ego. The elegant sounds of a live string quartet drifted up to the balcony, blending perfectly with the joyful hum of female success. I took a sip of my sparkling cider, adjusting the bodice of my emerald green evening gown. I had never felt more beautiful or more completely in control of my own destiny. Heavy footsteps approached from behind, and I did not even have to turn around to know exactly who it was. Tasha stepped onto the balcony, looking absolutely flawless in a sharp black tuxedo suit, her signature crimson lipstick perfectly applied. She handed me a small crystal plate of hors d'oeuvres and leaned against the glass railing right next to me. The event is a massive historic success, Nia, she said, clinking her crystal glass against mine. We just surpassed our fundraising goal for the evening, and the local business press is absolutely eating it up. I smiled, taking a bite of a perfectly seared scallop. I owe half of this to you, Tasha, I replied honestly. You secured the commercial permits and bulldozed through the city zoning laws faster than anyone else ever could. Tasha laughed, a rich, confident sound. It was my absolute pleasure. Besides, I had a lot of extra free time since I am no longer dealing with your horrific former-in-laws. Speaking of which, she added, her tone shifting into a sharp, familiar edge. I ran into Keisha yesterday afternoon. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. Where, I asked. Tasha smirked, taking a slow sip of her champagne. At a discount retail store in a rundown strip mall over in Marietta. She was wearing a terribly itchy polyester uniform and a plastic name tag folding clearance sweaters. She actually tried to hide behind a rack of discounted winter coats when she saw me walk through the sliding doors, but I made sure to walk directly up to her register. I bought a cheap pair of sunglasses just to force her to ring me up and hand me my receipt. I shook my head, letting out a quiet chuckle. How the mighty have completely fallen. Exactly, Tasha agreed. Apparently, after the loan sharks took her luxury condo and ruined her pristine credit score, she had to move into a tiny roach-infested studio apartment. Shirley is completely estranged from her now. After I formally evicted Shirley from the townhouse, she had to move into a cheap state-funded assisted living facility. Shirley actively blames Keisha for fighting with DeAndre and triggering the entire collapse. The family is totally fractured. They do not even speak to each other anymore. They just sit in their separate, miserable lives, blaming everyone else for their own terrible choices. I looked out over the glowing Atlanta skyline, processing the final, absolute destruction of the people who had tried to bury me. They had spent years relying heavily on my wealth while simultaneously resenting my incredible success. Now they had absolutely nothing left but their own bitter, toxic reflections. I turned away from the railing and looked directly into the camera, addressing all of you who have stayed with me through this deeply incredible journey. For so long, I bought into the highly toxic narrative of the strong Black woman. Society teaches us from a very young age that our ultimate value is tied directly to how much emotional and physical pain we can silently endure. We are constantly praised for our resilience. We are loudly applauded for carrying the crushing weight of our families on our shoulders. We are told that a good woman stands by her man no matter what terrible things he does, holding him up even while he actively tears her down. We are expected to fund their wild dreams, manage their massive insecurities, pray away their bad behavior, and shrink our own brilliance just to keep the fragile peace in our homes. But let me tell you the absolute undeniable truth. That version of strength is a total trap. It is a beautifully disguised cage designed to drain our vital resources and keep us subservient to men who completely refuse to do their own emotional and financial labor. Real strength is not measured by how much horrific abuse you can tolerate. It is measured by how quickly you completely refuse to accept it. True power is recognizing that your peace, your physical safety, and your hard-earned financial success are not bargaining chips to be gambled away by a partner who feels deeply threatened by your radiant light. I spent years pouring my money and my very soul into a man who looked at my success and only saw a bank account he could drain to feed his massive ego. He literally tried to kill me because he believed my life was worth less than his failed restaurant concept. But the moment I stopped performing the exhausting role of the endlessly forgiving wife, the moment I stopped feeding his endless delusions, I realized just how much incredible energy I actually possessed. I stopped pouring pure water into a toxic, bottomless well and started watering my own beautiful garden. We are taught to build our men up even if they use the bricks to crush us. But the moment I stopped feeding his ego, I realized I had enough energy to build an empire. Have you ever realized the person you were sacrificing everything for was the one holding the knife? Share your story in the comments. Don't let their secrets stay in the dark.